rights and democracy set by the Council of Europe, as well as by its landmark achievements in a significant number of respects, including with education, on student mobility and the recognition of study periods and diplomas, as well as by its work on cultural heritage, just to mention a few activities of the Council of Europe, and in association with the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media, of which I am the current chairman. At the same time, I support the expressed desire of countries in the Western Balkans to join the European Union. As we have seen with Turkey, an EU candidate status can be a very long process, and I'm afraid that the EU candidacy of Ukraine might also be a very long-term project. The EU has grown stronger through several crises. However, as we noticed just now, the challenges caused by the Russian war against Ukraine on energy markets, financial markets, and economies globally make political decisions within the EU ever more complicated and divided. Therefore, as this report does, I would urge the strengthening of European perspectives, standards, and cooperation among our member states. Equally, as also emphasized within the report, we must not play down the value of our own organization, the Council of Europe. In this spirit, I'd like to highlight one issue. Having been Foreign Minister and Prime Minister of Greece in the past, Mr. Papandreou will be only too well aware of the decades-long and dire humanitarian situation and suffering of so many irregular migrants on the so-called Balkan route from Greece to Western EU countries and the United Kingdom. Frontex has recorded an increase of 350% this year to more than 86,000 persons in the Western Balkan route, and an increase of 120% to more than 25,000 persons in the Eastern Mediterranean route to Greece. Most of them have fallen victim to human smugglers and are forced to sleep rough in the woods or in the open in cities. I'm not sure that the situation will necessarily improve through an enlargement of the European Union. Yet for member states of the Council of Europe, European solidarity and cooperation based on the rule of law and human rights should be fully achievable in this context in order to avoid such human suffering. Mr. President, this is the European perspective which the founders of the Council of Europe enshrined into the statute of our organization.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Notre prochaine oratrice est Madame Liliane Tanguy de la France. Elle parle au nom du groupe ADLE. Excusez-moi. Liliane.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, le groupe ALDE accueille favorablement le rapport et la proposition de résolution qui nous sont soumis au débat aujourd'hui. Parce que les Balkans occidentaux font partie intégrante de l'Europe, parce qu'ils appartiennent à notre histoire et qu'ils partagent notre culture, notre sentiment d'appartenance et nos valeurs, le groupe ALDE soutiendra toujours les efforts allant dans le sens de leur rapprochement à l'Union européenne. Depuis le sommet de Thessalonique en 2003, des avancées ont eu lieu, mais nous déplorons la lenteur du processus d'intégration des pays des Balkans occidentaux à l'Union européenne. Conscient des difficultés que traverse cette partie de l'Europe, notre groupe salue toutes les initiatives visant à maintenir la paix et la sécurité et à en éloigner le spectre de la violence. Nous n'ignorons pas qu'un certain nombre de conflits latents pourraient porter atteinte aux relations de bon voisinage et à la stabilité en Europe. Nous partageons les préoccupations exprimées dans ce rapport quant au manquement à l'état de droit et à la bonne gouvernance, aux atteintes aux droits des minorités, à la liberté de la presse et à l'indépendance de la justice, dont ces pays ne sont pas exempts. Nous avons conscience que les conflits bilatéraux y font souvent obstacle à une coopération régionale inclusive. C'est pourquoi le groupe ALDE croit en la vertu de la coopération interparlementaire pour renforcer l'intégration régionale et la sécurité démocratique de la région. Avec le retour de la guerre sur notre continent, il est devenu urgent de réagir et de protéger les Balkans occidentaux en facilitant le processus de leur intégration à l'Union européenne. Le groupe ALDE soutient la proposition visant à développer davantage les activités de coopération dans les domaines prioritaires tels que l'état de droit et la bonne gouvernance, ainsi qu'à appuyer les initiatives des sociétés civiles locales. Il entend également l'intérêt du Conseil de l'Europe à vouloir intensifier la dimension politique de son engagement dans les Balkans occidentaux. Le groupe approuve également la recommandation adressée au comité des ministres de soutenir les forces démocratiques dans ces pays afin qu'ils s'engagent à améliorer leur fonctionnement administratif à tous les niveaux de gouvernance, à intensifier la lutte contre la corruption, à renforcer la place de la société civile et à s'abstenir à tout discours provocateur. Le Conseil de l'Europe doit poursuivre son dialogue avec l'Union européenne en proposant son aide dans les domaines où ses compétences sont salutaires, tels que l'état de droit, la démocratie et les droits humains. Notre groupe souhaite souligner l'intérêt porté à la création de la communauté politique européenne qui a vu le jour le 6 octobre dernier en Conseil européen à l'initiative du président français Emmanuel Macron. Cette plateforme intergouvernementale est un espace de dialogue politique dont la priorité est de renforcer la coopération dans les domaines de la défense et de la sécurité et d'améliorer l'interconnexion dans les secteurs de télécommunications, de la cybersécurité et des transports. La création de la communauté politique européenne répond à la nécessité de recréer une unité continentale à la suite de l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine. Elle n'a donc pas vocation à se substituer à l'Union européenne ni au Conseil de l'Europe. Au contraire, elle aura pour mission de préparer les dirigeants, les élus et les citoyens des pays candidats à leur intégration dans l'UE. Et le groupe ALDE croit fortement à la complémentarité et aux synergies entre ces espaces de dialogue politique pour permettre l'accélération du processus d'intégration des pays des Balkans occidentaux dans l'Union européenne. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Madame Tanguy. I will give now the floor to Mr. Lukaidis.
Dear colleagues, I wish to congratulate Mr. Papandreou for this important report. In the many discussions we have had at the committee level prior to this debate, it has become clear that the European Union has fallen short on the promises it has delivered to the Western Balkans, and its credibility is at stake. This is a negative development that has led to widespread disappointment, anti-European sentiment, and a democratic deficit in the region. The Western Balkans, dear colleagues, have suffered armed conflicts and the NATO war in the 90s. At the same time, the neoliberal policies imposed over the years, including deregulation of the labor market and policies of privatization, have aggravated unemployment and precarity, brought about further deterioration of labor and social rights, poverty and social exclusion. This, in turn, has caused further marginalization and disappointment, especially among the youth, as well as increased racism and interethnic tensions. Council of Europe, and particular PACE, must stand by the Balkan countries in favor of democracy, peace and social justice, social and economic development, and the strengthening of democratic institutions. Standard setting, monitoring and cooperation are essential in keeping up the momentum and achieving progress with respect to Copenhagen criteria. We must also push for reconciliation and good neighbourhood relations in the region. The PRESPA agreement has sent a clear message that historical disputes can be solved through dialogue. It is essential for the people of these countries to view cooperation with the EU as a process of mutual interests, one that can foster sustainable development for the whole region, as well as security and stability. Renewed commitment is what we must achieve. Rewarding progress with a concrete perspective of EU integration will be beneficial to the region and Europe as a whole. But enlargement must go beyond the technical level and reach the parliamentary and intergovernmental dimensions, local and regional authorities and civil society organizations. Furthermore, the EU and the enlargement process in itself needs to change so that the Union's strategic objectives reflect and prioritize policies aimed at combating exploitation, precarity, the deterioration of labor and social rights, poverty and social exclusion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukaidis. I give the floor now to Mr. Fassino.
Grazie signor Presidente. Io ringrazio naturalmente il collega Papandreou e condivido la sua relazione a nome del gruppo socialista, la sosterremo. Io vorrei partire da questa considerazione. Siamo di fronte a una guerra atroce che tutti seguiamo con angoscia in Ucraina e quella guerra però ci porta ad altre guerre che hanno sconvolto il continente dalla fine della Seconda Guerra Mondiale. Penso alle guerre nel Caucaso e penso alle guerre nei Balcani. E che cosa ci dicono queste guerre? Ci dicono che se, mentre da 80 anni c'è pace, stabilità e sicurezza nell'Unione Europea, le insidie alla nostra sicurezza, le insidie alla pace, i luoghi dell'instabilità e della guerra sono le regioni esterne all'Unione Europea. E questo ci deve dire quindi che l'unico modo per evitare che questa instabilità, queste guerre possano continuare anche in futuro è quello di integrare queste regioni e portarle dentro l'Unione Europea, perché l'Unione Europea è la condizione della stabilità, è la condizione della sicurezza e la condizione della pace. E questo vale in particolare oggi per i Balcani. All'indomani della pace di Dayton, 1995, la comunità internazionale promise ai Balcani che l'integrazione nelle istituzioni euroatlantiche sarebbe stata la via per garantire stabilità e sicurezza alla regione, facendolo uscire da una lunga storia di guerre, al punto che il lessico politico si è arricchito di una parola che lo indica. Balcanizzazione voleva indicare appunto una realtà caratterizzata da alta frammentazione e permanente conflitto. Ebbene, sono passati 27 anni da Dayton, sono passati 19 anni dal Consiglio europeo di Salonicco e soltanto 4 paesi hanno avviato i negoziati, 2 dei quali soltanto negli ultimi mesi, Macedonia del Nord e Albania, e per altri 2 paesi, Bosnia e Kosovo, siamo ancora ad una prospettiva lontana. E guardate, tutto questo decorso di tempo ha prodotto già delle conseguenze, ha prodotto frustrazioni nelle opinioni pubbliche che vedono l'obiettivo dell'Europa sempre più lontano e evanescente, ha permesso l'ingresso nella regione ad altri attori, dalla Cina alla Russia, alla Turchia, ad altri ancora, e ha favorito come alibi il rallentamento nei paesi balcanici dell'adeguamento della loro legislazione agli standard europei. Io credo che sia, come giustamente sollecita Papandreou, il necessario cambiare passo. Abbiamo bisogno di un salto di qualità, di una netta accelerazione del processo di allargamento, accelerando i negoziati con Serbia, Montenegro, Albania e Macedonia del Nord, determinando scelte precise per la Bosnia, riconoscendogli almeno lo status di candidato all'adesione e dando una prospettiva di integrazione al Kosovo. In tutto questo il Consiglio d'Europa può svolgere, come ha svolto fin qui, un ruolo essenziale nel favorire dialogo, pacificazione e sostenere le riforme che questi paesi devono fare. E io credo appunto che queste sono le scelte che noi dobbiamo sostenere perché, come ha detto Papandreou, da quello che accadrà nei Balcani, così come nelle altre aree dell'Europa orientali, dipende l'idea che abbiamo di Europa e come siamo in grado di costruire un continente di pace, di sicurezza e di stabilità.
Thank you, Mr. Fassino. I give now the floor to Mr. Chatzivassiliou.
Madam Chair, dear colleagues, I would like to thank and congratulate Mr. Papandreou for his excellent report, which we approve here today. By all means, the future of the Western Balkans is inside the European Union for the sake of regional stability. Our Council should play a pivotal role in order to give a new impetus to the EU enlargement process. At the same time, we have to urge all the Western Balkan states to accelerate the necessary reforms. As a Greek, I am proud of the Thessaloniki summit, where an important document was agreed. And I am proud for our today's government, which is among the first ones in Europe that expressed their unequivocal support for the European perspective of all our neighbors. Let us be frank, dear colleagues. In the previous decades, Europe had turned a blind eye to corrupted leaders in the region of the Western Balkans. We were unable to give a way out to the younger generation that lasted for a European future. And what happened, dear colleagues? Euroscepticism, nationalism, and the influence of third revisionist countries grew in its place among the region. The Western Balkans belong geographically, historically, and economically to Europe. The Russian invasion in Ukraine justifiably takes up most of Europe's political energy. It looks like the Balkans are becoming a sideline story. I would like to ring an alarm bell for all of us. We need to inject a new momentum in the Western Balkans perspective. Yes, the Western Balkans should continue their efforts, but Europe also has to deliver. Leaving the region in a limbo will cause instability and the dangerous strengthening of malign influence by third actors. Can we afford that? The answer is no, dear colleagues. Of course, all Western Balkan states should work a lot. Strengthening of the democratic institutions, respect for the rule of law, human rights and good neighborly relations, protection of minorities and stronger reforms are the minimum steps. Furthermore, we strongly support their alignment with the European Common Foreign Security Policy, but we would like them to join as real partners who share the same values and ideas with the European Union. This is why it's also important for all Western Balkan states to follow and implement the policy of sanctions against Putin's Russia. Europe is not just words. Europe is principles and actions above all. So, dear colleagues, our Parliamentary Assembly must revive the European dream for the Western Balkans. The question is not if they belong to the European Union. The question is when they will be ready to join. And the report of Mr. Papandreou is definitely towards the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The list of speakers on behalf of the political groups is herewith closed. I go now to the normal speakers list. And the first on my list is Mr. Kolajian from Romania, Socialist Group.
Madam President, colleagues, first of all, I would like to congratulate our rapporteur, George Papandreou, for his excellent report. Definitely, I will share and support his conclusions. Secondly, just a few political comments. The first one is the following one. All the time, the EU enlargement process was a huge asset for the European Union. And it was the case with the Central Eastern former communist countries. It is the case now with some of the Eastern partners, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, and I hope also Georgia before the end of the year. It should be definitely the case, but not only making reference to a European perspective. We should use the proper words, accession to the European Union for the whole Balkan region, and I underline the whole Balkan region, because in the end, the geopolitical and strategic vision should be the following one. The only solution for a stable, democratic, prosperous Balkan region, for peace, first of all, is the fully integrated Balkan region. This is the essence of what we are discussing now. Of course, the history was extremely complicated, and sometimes still is. This is why when dealing and looking to some bilateral, still complicated relations within this region, tensions and so on. And speaking from our national also experience from Romania and also my own personal experience, we know and I know also how precious, how valuable is the regional contribution. Some regional organizations that are gathering the members of the Balkan region, for instance, the Southeast European Cooperation Process, and I do remind in 2014, under my national presidency, the Romanian presidency of CECP, I had the honor to assure the presidency of CECP at that time, with the common effort of the countries in the region, inter alia, with extremely important wisdom coming from Serbia and from Kosovo. We succeeded to accommodate Kosovo and to invite Kosovo to be part of Southeast European cooperation process. It was an exceptional moment. Based on the wisdom coming from our Greek and Macedonian friends, we succeeded to finalize the final document, and we succeeded to have a good presidency and good achievements during 2014 mandate at that time. So it is possible. Let's use also these internal resources from the region. Finally, of course, the criteria should be respected. Inter alia, the protection of national minorities in the region, including the Romanian national minority or the Armenians, it is important. But in the end, everything is political. So there is a need for a clear political commitment, and this is why the signal that we are sending today from Strasbourg, from the Council of Europe, it's extremely important. Let's support the full integration of the Balkan region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Nikos Tonaritis from Cyprus.
Madam Chair, allow me first of all to thank and congratulate Mr. Papandreou for his excellent report. Dear colleagues, the European perspective of the Western Balkans must remain a strategic priority for the European Union. To this end, the Council of Europe may have a notable contribution in encouraging both sides to reaffirm their commitments to the integration process and in supporting a new dynamic of dialogue and cooperation. It is essential that the process becomes fast-paced and efficient and conducive to political, economic, but also social reform. Solid mechanisms should be established safeguarding good public governance, the independence of the judiciary, the freedom of the media and civil society, and full protection of human rights, especially those of ethnic minorities. Balkan countries have made noteworthy progress against deep-rooted tendencies for corruption, party polarization, and lack of transparency and accountability. Yet the region remains vulnerable to external influence and manipulation driven by historical ties and political and economic interests. The future of the Balkans should be safeguarded from such threatening dispositions. We must ensure that conditions of stability, democratic security, strong neighborly relations, and cooperation prevail. A European perspective for the Western Balkans is a geostrategic investment for the whole of Europe. Therefore, we, the Council of Europe, must continue to encourage and expect full alignment with our common European standards, values, and principles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Howell, United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. I would also like to offer my congratulations to George Papandreou for this report and for focusing our attention on the West Balkans. Because as we have already heard, there should be an alarm bell ringing for us to look at this area. It is an area that needs to be monitored in great depth. As we have heard from Piero Fassino, there are other actors waiting to play their part in this area. The most obvious one is Russia. But there is one that is even more pernicious than Russia for playing its part in this area, and that is Iran. Iran is playing a major role in the West Balkans, and you need only look at the size of its embassy in Sarajevo to see that something must be going on. There are two areas on which I would like to concentrate. The first is Bosnia Herzegovina, where I have just returned from election monitoring for the presidential and the parliamentary elections. One can look at these elections in two terms. One can look at them in the short term, where there was no disruption that we were able to see, and where people could vote without being at the point of a gun. But you can also look at them in terms of the long term. And in this case, they must be seen as disastrous. For people to go into an election booth and for them to spend 30 minutes reading through the 4 pages, the 4 areas or the ballot papers means that we have developed a system that is completely complicated for the area. And the fact that when you look at who voted, it was young people that were excluded from this because most of them have left the country is illustrative of the fact that the Dayton Accord simply does not work and is not sustainable for the long term. So whatever we do, we must fix it and get it right. The second area I said I would deal with too is Kosovo, where my government is supportive of Kosovo, and so is my delegation. It can bring nothing but benefits in human rights terms to the people of Kosovo to be fully members of this organization. There is throughout the region still too much dependence on Russia for natural gas, and that means big investment from the West. For the Council of Europe, I can only agree with the report that the Council should play a greater role in promoting dialogue, including regional cooperation, the normalization of relations, and the solution of bilateral differences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howell. I give the floor now to Mr. Kern, Claude Kern, France.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Mes chers collègues, je veux remercier notre collègue Georges Papandreou pour son excellent rapport. Je reviens moi-même de Sarajevo, où, avec d'autres collègues, j'ai participé à cette mission d'observation préélectorale puis électorale. Et grâce aux échanges que nous avons pu avoir sur place, j'ai pu toucher du doigt certaines des problématiques évoquées dans ce rapport. Prendre en compte de manière adéquate les situations et les besoins de l'Albanie, de la Bosnie Herzegovine, du Monténégro, de la Macédoine du Nord, de la Serbie et du Kosovo m'apparaît être une nécessité pour l'Union européenne, tout comme pour les pays concernés. Ne nous le cachons pas, la marche vers l'intégration européenne est longue et ardue, tant la reprise de l'acquis communautaire suppose l'adaptation des législations et des pratiques. La situation du Monténégro est à cet égard frappante. S'il a ouvert l'ensemble des plus de 30 chapitres de négociations, seuls 3 sont aujourd'hui provisoirement clos. Je partage les préoccupations exprimées par notre collègue rapporteur sur l'évolution de la situation dans la région. Le climat politique polarisé aboutit parfois à des conflits interinstitutionnels. Dans plusieurs États, on relève malheureusement de graves manquements à l'état de droit, de sérieuses difficultés de gouvernance et des failles dirimantes dans l'organisation et l'indépendance du système judiciaire. La liberté des médias reste un enjeu, tout comme le respect des minorités nationales. Ces problèmes sont encore aggravés par des reculs démocratiques que l'on observe dans certains de ces pays, comme dans bien d'autres pays d'Europe. Nier ces problèmes serait mentir. Dire qu'il sera facile de les résoudre aussi. Et pour autant, il nous faut avancer et donner des perspectives positives aux États des Balkans occidentaux afin d'éviter qu'ils se tournent vers d'autres influences qui prêtent moins d'attention aux enjeux démocratiques. Je crois que les pays en préadhésion devraient pouvoir tirer plus rapidement et sans attendre leur adhésion complète le bénéfice des efforts qu'ils consentent. Le fait d'avoir revu la méthodologie du processus d'intégration pour le rendre à la fois plus rapide et progressif, mais aussi réversible, me paraît être une mesure de bon sens. Il nous faut réaffirmer avec force la perspective européenne des Balkans occidentaux, sans rien cacher des marches ardues qu'implique l'adhésion à l'Union européenne. Il en va d'ailleurs de même pour l'Ukraine et la Moldavie, et peut-être, j'espère un jour, la Géorgie. Mais la phase de préadhésion est une étape cruciale si l'on veut éviter d'importer des problèmes systémiques au sein de l'Union européenne. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Kern. Next speaker is Mrs. Emine Gunay.
Thank you, Chair. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the rapporteur for bringing up a very important regional issue. Integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union is of significant value in terms of social and economic development and welfare and stability of the region and Europe alike. It surely serves the benefits of interests of the both sides. Therefore, I think the enlargement and membership process should be truly endorsed. Because this will also push the regional countries for further political reforms and change in rather more democratic and transparent direction. Membership of the Western Balkans to the EU will contribute to the efforts aiming at tackling the challenges regional countries face vis-à-vis one another and empowering political and diplomatic attempts for more grounded cooperation in the region. I believe this process has also become a catalyst to address political and ethnic fractures and division in the region, especially by pushing for political reforms in order to provide and safeguard sustainable social, economic, political, and administrative structures. In addition, the enlargement and membership process is an invaluable chance nowadays to render and keep aspirations for European integration vivid and credible. This is even more evident as we are in a period in which the European vision is questioned and waning. Nationalistic and xenophobic sentiments as well as Islamophobia is widespread in almost every corner of the Europe. For this reason, it should be deemed as an opportunity to help reverse this unpleasant trend in Europe and rebuild confidence in European democratic values. Finally, taking into consideration the history of the Balkans, the global and regional geopolitical and security challenges aroused by the third parties contending for the influence in the region, it is for the benefit of the Western Balkan countries and the EU to deepen and finalize the integration and membership process. I believe this will contribute to the security and stability in the region and the European continent in the end. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I have now Mr. Pierre-Alain Frides from Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Vice-Présidente, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. Je suis suisse, on est en train de parler d'adhésion à l'Union européenne, donc je suis plutôt mal placé. Et en plus, je ne suis pas un grand spécialiste de la région des Balkans, même si j'ai à quelques reprises participé à des observations d'élections dans la région et je suis allé 2 fois avec une commission parlementaire suisse visiter les troupes suisses. Oui, il y a des troupes suisses à l'étranger, en l'occurrence au Kosovo. Mais je me permets en fait quelques remarques qui, je pense, iront tout à fait dans le sens du rapporteur qui a effectué un très bon travail. Donc une anecdote d'abord, je suis médecin et j'ai envoyé un de mes patients, médecin en Suisse, se faire opérer dans un hôpital régional et ce patient a la caractéristique d'être un Kosovar, réfugié en Suisse, naturalisé suisse, mais qui, 20 ans avant l'événement dont je vous parle, avait vu son frère tué sous ses yeux par un militaire serbe. Et j'ai envoyé ce patient à l'hôpital et là, il s'est retrouvé face à un médecin serbe, l'anesthésiste. Ils se sont insultés et mon patient a quitté l'hôpital. Donc plus de 20 ans après les événements, la tension était encore énorme. Et cette tension, je l'ai vécue en visitant par 2 fois avec les troupes suisses Mitrovice, avec cette ville séparée par le fleuve Ibar, d'un côté une population plutôt kosovare, albanaise, et de l'autre serbe. Et la tension est palpable. Et cette tension, elle va durer très longtemps. Et la seule façon de la résoudre, c'est de sortir par le haut. Et sortir par le haut, c'est donner des perspectives, notamment des perspectives économiques, sociales, de progrès, de développement. Et ça passe, pour moi, à l'évidence, par une entrée dans l'Europe, dans l'Union européenne. Et c'est véritablement offrir à ces pays-là la motivation pour abandonner ces haines qui vont se transmettre de génération en génération et qui sont actuellement toujours très vivaces. Et l'autre élément, et M. Kern en a parlé avant, c'est que si l'Europe ne s'occupe pas de cette région, je vous promets qu'il y a d'autres puissances qui le feront, la Chine, la Russie, avec des intentions peut-être un petit peu moins louables. Donc vraiment, allons dans le sens des propositions et faisons en sorte que cette région, les Balkans occidentaux, ne soit pas oubliée par l'Europe.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Frides. My next speaker is Mrs. Bakoyannis, Greece.
Dear colleagues, the Western Balkans produce more history than they can consume, said Churchill. Yet that history today lacks honoring. It needs recognition, as it is none other than part of our history, the European history. The report in question reaffirms the support for the European Union prospect of the Western Balkans, a promise that has been forgotten and is long overdue to the people of that region. I want to congratulate the rapporteur, Mr. George Papandreou, for his excellent work, dedication and insight within the report and resolution. It is as timely as it can be, following the outbreak of war in Europe, following the rise of geopolitics and global insecurity, but also following new attempts of Europe to unify, as evident by the first European Political Community Summit that took place in Prague just a few days ago. But we need not to look to new formats and forget the ones that have guaranteed peace in Europe for many years. The EU prospect for all the countries of the Western Balkans, and I repeat, all the countries, has been the driver for reforms, for peace and stability in the Western Balkans for many years now. Yes, they are not all in the same level. Yes, there are a lot of problems still in the Western Balkans. But if today the European Union does not send a clear message that we mean business, that we want the Western Balkans to be part of the European Union, then the disillusionment for the people will be so big that the interference of other players in the region, as a lot of colleagues already mentioned, will be there. China is there, Russia is there, Iran is there, a lot of other outside countries are there and are interested in the Western Balkans. Dear colleagues, this is a question the Europeans must solve. I'm grateful for all the support we get from people from outside the European Union. But the European Union must work now. And the decision must be made as quickly as possible, because time for the Western Balkans is running out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bakoyannis. And now give the floor, the next speaker is Mrs. Zita Gourmet.
Thank you very much, dear President, distinguished colleague. The COVID-19 global pandemic and the war in Ukraine redirected our attention to the fact that the enlargement policy is a tool to advance the geostrategic interest of the EU and opportunity to foster European unity. At the level of statement of principle, there is almost unanimous agreement in the EU on the need to accelerate the accession of the Western Balkan countries to the EU. Hungary has traditionally been among the pro-enlargement countries. But in reality, the process has been stalled for years. EU constantly sets new conditions and criteria for membership to the Western Balkan countries. Analyses have shown that currently no less than 15 EU member countries would not be able to fully meet all the conditions for membership set to Western Balkan countries. The situation clearly needs to change urgently. Countries in the region are doing a lot to integrate with the EU. The EU should take these positive development and messages seriously and take real steps towards accession. They need to act now. Among the positive messages from the region, I would like to mention here an important event of the last 2 weeks. 1st and 2nd of September was organized in Belgrade, a summit of the Open Balkan Initiative. It is a joint project of Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania, based on the idea of free flow of people, goods, capital, and services. Montenegrin Prime Minister and the chair of the PIC Council of Ministers also attended the summit. The Hungarian and Turkish foreign ministers were present too. At the opening of the summit, the Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama stated that leaders of member countries will seriously consider inviting other countries that are EU members and important for the region, such as Greece, Italy, Hungary, and Turkey, to join to the regional initiative. The initiative is compatible with the EU principle. Open Balkan is a regional project, no compensation for membership in the EU, or a kind of waiting room for membership. It is a peace project, just like the coal and steel community, a predecessor to the EU. Open Balkan creates a new business environment and atmosphere in individual states and the region, as well as new opportunities for the cooperation. Faster flow of people, goods, capital, and services, accelerated growth of the economic indicators have proved that Western Balkan countries have something to offer to the EU. They are also proof that Western Balkan countries want, can, and are able to cooperate with the EU, that they must formally and legally be part of the community of the European people, and that the centuries already they have been part of Europe. The message sent from the summit is the Open Balkan countries demonstrate solidarity at the time of the crisis. I'm convinced that the Open Balkan initiative will speed up the integration of the region. These countries can act together towards the EU as a group of countries with clearly defined requests and goals. The upcoming winter 2020 and 2023 will be a great challenge and a test for all of us. It is the Union's turn to respond positively to the positive signals. The enlargement process cannot be endlessly postponed. Thank you very much, George Papandreou, for your great report and for the endless support of the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mrs. Jurida Tabaku from Albania.
First of all, let me thank the rapporteur, but also for the report, and you have to be from the region to understand really the region. Today, in the UN Security Council, a resolution will be approved condemning the Russian attacks on Kiev. And the war in Ukraine has awakened memories in the Balkans. Several Balkan countries are still pointing fingers at each other, and I agree that should be condemnation, but we should also all move forward. Balkan countries should accept responsibilities and move forward. Moving forward means moving towards EU. We cannot allow any more Balkan countries which have aligned foreign policies with Russia. We cannot align any more Balkan countries which are Eurosceptics, and we cannot align any more Balkan countries which are not in the standards and also norms of EU. Albania has been in this process longer than other Balkan countries, and we are aware that speed but also compliance with criteria are equally important. This is a very merit-based process and should not be considered as an award or a prize. Europe has found force from within during the pandemics, especially now during the war, and I'm sure that we can all learn from the last 30 years of a very long accession process for some of our countries. The region has not been sheltered from democratic backsliding, from corruption, from breach of human rights, and not all countries in the region are able to hold free and fair elections. But I believe that there is no other transformative process than the accession one. So giving the opportunity to individual countries, but also to the whole region to advance, is also contributing in enforcing democracies in each of these countries. The region has been full of conflicts, disputes, wars, but the common perspective of EU accession is widely accepted, from 94% of support in Albania to 28% in some of other countries. EU member countries have also considered this as a strategic object and vision for some time, but that time, I think, is now gone. We have done too little, too late, and I believe that we should move from strategy to action plans, and this has to happen now. Several achievements have happened during the last years that no one thought would have been possible. The Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, the Albanian-Montenegro moving ahead, starting the screening process, Montenegro, but also Serbia already advanced, and again, too little, too late. EU is the biggest donor in the region, is the biggest investor, the biggest trade partner, but also EU has to be the first choice for all of our countries. So in supporting this report, I believe that also this assembly should play a bigger role in terms of, with the bodies representing it, such as Greco and Manival, in terms of setting standards that are necessary for the EU process. All the resolutions, documents that we approve here should value something. We should put them to use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko from Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to say that it is extremely important and up-to-time report and topic. Because this is finally, we are here now discussing strategic topic. And this is the expanding of the free world. And Western Balkans should be part, extremely important part of free world. And we should do everything to help them to do it. In other case, we will have great problems there, and we know how it could look like. That's why I just want to remind you that this is not a vacuum, and other players in the world, autocracies, tyrannies, are trying to influence this region, are trying to use Western Balkans to have more bloodshed, to have more chaos in the world. Who organized coup d'etat in Montenegro? Russia. Who tries to destabilize Bosnia Herzegovina? Russia. So today we need to say that we should do everything we can to make these countries prosperous, to make them being a part of our common, they are already part of our common values, but we need to make even next steps to make them stronger, to support democracy, human rights, rule of law in all these countries. In general, we should do everything we can to make all planet free world. But we should start with Europe. We should start with our own continent. And there should not be any holes in the map of Europe where one country or another country is not part of big European project where we appreciate the human rights, the rule of law, the democracy, which are our core values. So that's why it's so important to support these countries today. And especially I want to say about Kosovo. Kosovo should be recognized by all countries of the Council of Europe. For the moment, 12 countries have not recognized it. I address to you, please recognize this country as independent state, like they fought for their future, for their independence. They should sit here together with us. They should be part of Council of Europe. Only like this we can be stronger, and this country will also flourish. I sponsored a bill to Ukrainian parliament to support and to recognize independence of Kosovo. And we all should do this and together move ahead. I'm sure that these countries can be a very strong part of our common big project. But for this, we should work. And I just want to remind you that not only free world is united, not free world is also united. Just a week ago, I woke up in my native city, Odessa, from explosions just 500 meters from my home. What was it? Iranian drone kamikaze. So that is a sign. So this is today we have a huge, big war between free world and not free world. So let's support free world. Let's be stronger, bigger. Let's support Western Balkans. Kosovo este Europe.
For sure they have heard you. I give now the floor to Mr. Jacques Lenné, France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Les Balkans occidentaux font intégralement partie de l'Europe. C'est une évidence géographique et culturelle. Mais force est de constater que les soubresauts de l'histoire et les tourments politiques n'ont pas encore permis à un certain nombre d'États de la région de rejoindre l'Union européenne à laquelle ils aspirent d'adhérer. Le rapport de notre collègue Georges Papandréou souligne à juste titre les enjeux géopolitiques de cette région. Je partage son constat et ses inquiétudes alors que la guerre lancée par la Fédération de Russie en Ukraine peut être un ferment de division. L'enthousiasme initial du processus d'adhésion et l'envie d'adaptation ne doivent pas s'éroder. Or, malheureusement, certaines tendances contraires sont à l'œuvre sur fond de lassitude ou de résignation des populations qui se sentent laissées pour compte. Le rapport souligne que, selon plusieurs études, un nombre croissant de personnes, en particulier parmi les jeunes, pensent que la perspective de l'Union européenne ne se concrétisera jamais. C'est alors le nationalisme qui gagne en vigueur et l'on sait cela peut mener dans une région inflammable. L'enjeu politique est donc majeur pour les États des Balkans occidentaux. Il est majeur pour l'Union européenne à la fois dans son rapport à un voisinage qui a la vocation à intégrer, mais aussi pour son intégrité future. Car nous sommes confrontés en réalité à deux risques de déstabilisation que l'Union doit gérer. On ne peut en effet prendre le risque d'entériner une adhésion pour un seul motif politique si les prérequis, notamment en termes de démocratie et d'état de droit, ne sont pas remplis. J'appuie donc l'appel de notre collègue pour que le Conseil de l'Europe, grâce à son large panel d'instruments, puisse accompagner les États des Balkans occidentaux dans leurs réformes nécessaires. Je considère également que la révision des modalités du processus d'adhésion que la France avait appelé de ses vœux était nécessaire afin de garantir à la fois une progressivité et une réactivité accrue, mais aussi une réversibilité lorsque cela est nécessaire. Je me félicite aussi que plusieurs obstacles aient pu être levés, notamment par la levée de l'opposition de la Bulgarie à l'adhésion de la Macédoine du Nord ou encore par l'ouverture des négociations avec l'Albanie. Dans une période troublée, l'Union européenne et le Conseil de l'Europe doivent travailler de concert afin de donner des perspectives d'avenir réelles et crédibles aux pays des Balkans occidentaux. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, je donne la parole à M. Stefan Jovanovic from Serbia.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Dear Mr. Papandreou, distinguished delegates, it is a distinct privilege for me to address you at this salient occasion as the first representative of Serbia's liberal conservative central-right People's Party. Today's debate has featured important remarks on democracy and reform as some of the central tenets of the EU's enlargement agenda. To that, I would add the EU's own stated objective of fostering peace and stability in regions close to its border, which today may be more significant than it has been in many years. Regrettably, however, the EU has far too often prioritized the latter at the expense of the former, especially in relations with its candidates for accession. In so doing, it has anchored and fostered autocratic regimes in Western Balkans. We welcome the initiation of the European political community. This is a positive step in addressing the EU's enlargement shortcomings and Western Balkans' European prospects. I would like to bring to your attention the issue of new aspirants for membership in the Council of Europe from our region. Since the founding of the Council in 1949, the organization has grown to include 46 members, all of whom were accepted anonymously, having received the full support of the European Community of Nations. A potential decision to consider a bid for membership on behalf of the provisional authorities of self-government in Pristina, applying as the so-called Republic of Kosovo, could be a clear break with this long-standing practice, allowing division and disaccord to take precedent over the core values of this organization. Many distinguished members of this chamber rejected Pristina's claim to a statehood, and rightfully so. In a year in which the Council has repeatedly taken a principled stance on the need to respect the territorial integrity of its members, it is vital that this position continues to be upheld consistently and without exception. By committing a unilateral act of secession in 2009, the authorities in Pristina bluntly violated Serbia's democratic constitution and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244. Additionally, their poor track record on basic human rights and the rule of law stands in the stark contrast with their wish to join this council. Under the watchful eye of the secessionist authorities, Serbs of Kosovo have become one of the most endangered ethnic groups in Europe. Violators of territorial integrity, of sovereign states, international law, and basic human rights should not be embraced by the organization devoted to the protection of this principle. We do call upon the Parliamentary Assembly to reject the attempts of provisional authorities in Pristina to become part of the Council of Europe, for they clearly do not meet fundamental requirements. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I give now the floor to Mrs. Margreet Boer from the Netherlands.
Thank you. And I start with congratulations to the rapporteur for this important and balanced report. It is important for the international community to show commitment to the Western Balkans and not forget the region, especially in light of the recent steps towards Ukraine and Moldova. Further, the war in Ukraine has underlined the importance of EU enlargement towards the Western Balkans to prevent instability in the heart of Europe, especially given the ongoing attempts by Russia, but also China, Turkey and others, to gain influence. Renewed and concrete commitment from EU side is key, as the region has been neglected for the past decade and many promises have been broken. Previous week, I was member of the election observation mission in Bosnia Herzegovina. And what struck me there was the lack of perspective that was felt by the people, leading to young people leaving the country and an exceptional low birth rate. I will not comment now on the election as such, as the report of the mission has to be published, but I'd like to comment briefly on what happened directly after the election. On election day, the UN High Representative Schmid made changes to the Electoral Law. This is highly problematic. This action undermines him personally and the Office of the High Representative as an institution. Not only by changing the law on election day and so expressing distrust in the voters, the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also because with his changes he created further cemented ethnic divisions in the electoral system. And this will complicate negotiations on constitutional reform based on the Human Court of Human Rights verdicts. And this constitutional reform is necessary, also in the line of gaining candidate status to the EU. It is important that now, after the elections, inclusive and transparent negotiations on constitutional reform should be restarted, including NGOs and opposition parties. And important is that also the Venice Commission should be closely involved and give its assessment on any potential constitutional change. To give this country and its people perspective, the international community should offer support in meeting the standards on democracy and human rights, instead of interfere by hindering progressive reform or by cementing ethnic division. And this goes for the whole Western Balkans. We need to support a European perspective for the whole region. Let me end with a few words to the colleagues from Kosovo. I welcome them as speakers in our assembly and in this debate today, and I hope we can welcome them as a member state in the not too far future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Davor Stier, EPP, Croatia.
Dear colleagues, I hope that we all still remember the concept of Europe whole, free, and at peace. And that was the ordering concept after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But it has been challenged. It has been challenged by the near-abroad strategy of the Russian Federation, by the geopolitical concept of the Russian world. We saw that applied already in 2008, in Georgia, and then afterwards and today in Ukraine. And that was a challenge to the concept of Europe whole, free, and at peace. And that has consequences in weakening the idea of European integration, in fostering fragmentation, and that had consequences also in the Western Balkans. We have seen more geopolitical competition in the Western Balkans, but we have seen as well attempts to imitate the Russian world concept. Of course, not to recreate or to have a sphere of influence in the territory of the former Soviet Union, but a small sphere of influence in the territory of the former Yugoslavia. And that is a very dangerous concept. Instead of that, what we need to do is to strengthen the independence and the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all the 6 countries in the Western Balkans. And all the 6 countries in the Western Balkans need to redouble their commitment to the EU, to the reforms, to the rule of law, to the democratic reforms, to combating corruption, but also the full alignment with the common foreign and security policy. And that includes also sanctions against the Russian Federation. That is necessary, has not been yet done by all the countries in the Western Balkans, and it's necessary because Europe doesn't need Trojan horses now. So, having said that, there is also a huge responsibility on the EU to make good on the promise from Thessaloniki of a European perspective. And a lot of emphasis has been put on the political institutions, and that is okay. But we also need to enlarge the societies. And in this sense, we can go faster. Let me explain what I mean by enlarging to societies. There is a regional now agreement of a free roaming area. You can call from Belgrade to Tirana without paying roaming fees. But if you call Strasbourg, or if you call Athens, or if you call Zagreb, you have to pay roaming fees. So it's good to have regional cooperation, but with this regional free roaming area, we need to include it, integrate it immediately into the European free roaming area, to all the 4 freedoms, to have it integrated also to the societies of the Western Balkans. Then political institutions, of course, meeting the criteria will follow. And then, hopefully, we will have a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Creo que en un momento de enorme tumultuosidad en Europa, diría más bien incluso no solo en Europa, sino en el contexto euroasiático, no podemos permitirnos otro camino para los Balcanes que no sea el de neutralizar todas las tensiones, pero particularmente las tensiones interétnicas, fomentar de manera real y decidida la autonomía y la soberanía de cada uno de los países que conforman la región, y esto pasa obviamente por rechazar en toda medida las interferencias de potencias geopolíticas como puede ser Rusia, pero también por ser conscientes de que no podemos ejercer un constante protectorado de facto de estos países, y finalmente y sobre todo por acompañar con decisión los procesos de refuerzo de la democracia en los Balcanes. Creo que todos y todas las que creemos en el proyecto de Estado de Derecho, de democracia y de derechos humanos de este Consejo y del proyecto común europeo, estamos de acuerdo en integrar, en abrazar, en acoger a los países balcánicos en un contexto como el actual, más todavía. Lo debemos hacer porque son, obviamente, países hermanos, lo debemos hacer porque es garantía de estabilidad y paz no solo para estos países, sino para el conjunto de Europa, y lo debemos hacer sobre todo porque, más allá de que lo puedan desear sus élites políticas, por cierto, a veces muy separadas de las demandas de sus ciudadanos, lo debemos hacer porque los pueblos y los ciudadanos de estos países así lo exigen y así lo desean. Y es precisamente en este sentido que, para conseguir reforzar la perspectiva europea de los países de los Balcanes, creo que tenemos que hacer 3 cuestiones. En primer lugar, como ya se ha dicho previamente, las dinámicas económicas del neoliberalismo no pueden ser lo único y lo principal que exportamos, por no decir que imponemos, a estas sociedades. La contrapartida a la incorporación de estos países al proyecto común europeo no puede ser que sean socios económicos subalternos al servicio de las principales economías del proyecto europeo. En segundo lugar, la incorporación necesaria desde nuestro punto de vista de estos países pasa por asumir de una vez por todas una Europa realmente multirreligiosa. Creo que minorías culturales, que son mayorías además en sus países, como pueden ser la musulmana bosníaca, tienen que saber que con todo los acogemos y tienen que sentir que son parte de nuestro proyecto común. Y en tercer lugar, y para acabar, debemos de transitar esta incorporación de forma honesta. Cada uno de los países de los Balcanes no los debemos de ver como una pieza en el tablero geopolítico, como en una pieza en el tablero geopolítico que nosotros queremos jugar, sino como países con intereses soberanos y completamente legítimos. Solo así, respetando su singularidad, su soberanía y su autonomía, conseguiremos una integración y adhesión no solo de sus gobiernos o de sus estados, sino lo que es realmente importante, una adhesión del conjunto de sus sociedades.
Thank you very much. Now, before giving the floor to Saranda Bogujevski, I have to remind colleagues that since yesterday we gave the right to speak in the debates to Kosovo. And now in this debate on the Western Balkans, the first time that a member of the Assembly of Kosovo has the right to speak. So you are very welcome. So, Mrs. Saranda Bogojevski, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President, dear colleagues. Let me first start by thanking you for giving us this opportunity, but also the continued support that many of you have given to Kosovo over the years for us to come this far. And of course, for taking this decision for us to be able to actively engage in these debates in the plenary, and with a hope that soon we will have the full right of participation. I would also like to thank the President and the Secretary General for their guidance, and of course many colleagues here for the support. Also many thanks to George Papandreou for an outstanding report. There's so much to be said, and today I could be talking about many things, Kosovo's achievements, as one of the most vibrant democracies in the region. If you don't believe me, you can always come and visit and see for yourself. Our difficulties that we're facing, difficulties with our neighbor, or the not so distant past that we've had. But today we are faced with concerns much wider than our region. Today we are faced with a brutal war. Today we are struggling for democracy and so on. So today we are not only talking about the Western Balkans, but today we are talking about the future of Europe. We as Kosovo and all the countries of the Western Balkans are Europe. And there can be no other future for us other than being part of the European Union family. In this line of work that we all do, in every decision that we make, I always think how these decisions will impact the future of our generations, our children. So now more than ever, we have to be firm and brave and make the decisions that will have a positive impact on the future of our region, but also of the whole Europe. Now, as this is my first time addressing the plenary, I would like to tell my Ukrainian colleagues and also the people of Ukraine that our thoughts and our hearts and our prayers are with you. We know far well what you're going through. I myself am a survivor of a massacre during the war in Kosovo, and we will always stand with you in this fight and in this struggle. And we hope that this terrible war will come to an end soon and that justice will prevail. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
once again, congratulations. Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Mr. Edward Ley from the United Kingdom.
It's an honour, Madam President, to follow the last speaker from Kosovo, and we welcome us to this assembly of the free nations of Europe. Because, dear colleagues, make no mistake, we are now engaged in an existential battle in the world. On one hand, we have the free nations of the West, led by the United States of America, and let us have no criticism of that great republic, countries of the European Union, countries like my own Great Britain, and on the other hand, we have authoritarian regimes, Russia, China, Iran, who increasingly are flexing their muscles. And the opportunity in this debate is to say that we are united. And when it comes to issues like the Western Balkans, I believe that there is no greater opportunity than, on any issue for this assembly. The Council of Europe. Of course, we can debate these issues in terms of narrow, technocratic ones, in terms of whether some country or not can join the European Union because of some obscure economic criteria. But the fundamental issue of what we are about is not economics, is not trade. It is about what makes Europe, what makes our history. It's about human rights, freedom, and justice and democracy. And I personally believe that, in a way, in the Council of Europe, we have slightly lost our way. We have become too focused on narrow issues, dare I say it, on some woke issues, and not on the real issues that we can help these countries in the Western Balkans and so many other countries. The rule of law, free judiciary, minority rights, open media ownership. And we, in the Council of Europe, in our debates, must focus laser-like on these issues. Help the countries of the Western Balkans or any other member state of the Council of Europe to address these issues. Then there is a whole new role for the Council of Europe, a whole new role in resisting the threat from Iran, from China, from Russia. Now, I don't want to get involved in the debates over the Kosovo, but surely people do have a right to self-determination. And there is a question of de jure, de facto independence. So let us be united in this assembly and let us stand up for the freedom and the minority rights of everywhere in the Western Balkans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edward. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Darko Kevski from North Macedonia. You have the floor, Darko.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, first of all, I want to say congratulations to Mr. Papandreou for a great report and also for big support for all countries from the Western Balkans. The Republic of North Macedonia is a stronger country from 9th of July this year with the opening of accession negotiation. With North Macedonia and Albania as candidates, the entire Balkan region is stronger and it becomes a safer and more stable place for people to live. The enlargement process gives us a chance to be an equal member of the Union and chance to create policies and vote for important decisions alongside the democratic states that are the role models for good governance. Western Balkan countries are an integral part of Europe, and the enlargement process enables the region to be peaceful, stable, and democratic. The European Union is home to over 500 million people, and I welcome its decision to open the way for even more citizens. Peace and freedom are preserved to the European Union, and in this crisis situation we can see the solidarity of the member states. The protection of human rights and freedom of expression are guaranteed. Conditions for stronger economic and social progress are ensured, as well as the functioning of the public institution. We are proud that in you we see the true partner who support us, and we are proud of the historical success of the Republic of North Macedonia to open the negotiation. I am convinced that will deliver a great result, because we are ready to overcome all the challenges, to harmonize the legislation in the identified areas, but also to change the institutional practices, all with the aim of being a full member of the EU as soon as possible. In these challenging times, with the Russia aggression against Ukraine, we need to closely cooperate with joint activities as a region and show leadership with even closer partnership with the EU and the member states. The joint cooperation is crucial. Together, we have to make efforts to accelerate the green and digital transition, build just a sustainable society, invest in renewable resources and infrastructure. But most important for us as a region is to ensure the rule of law, fight with the systematic corruption, to make substantial reform of the public administration and create a democratic environment. Western Balkans are Europe, and we need strong partners to walk the path for common future in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Darko. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Sergei Sobolev from the Ukraine. Sergei, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Reporter. I think that Mr. Papandreou found a lot of answers, fortunately, on very complicated questions. But unfortunately, we have more questions than answers. So this discussion is very important not only to Western Balkans, it's very important to all European Union and to all Union of European peoples. First of all, of course, it's a war of civilizations. And when my previous colleagues mentioned new fascist regime of Putin in Russia, new dictator regimes in China or Iran, don't forget about Northern Korea, don't forget about Syria. I think that it's a real strategic war in the world. So it's a possibility to protect European Union, the values of European Union, only when you have strong forces. And Ukraine shows the whole world, with the thanks of your technologies and your weapon, that we can protect also European and world values of democracy and free world. When some leaders of your European countries forget that when you didn't pay money for your own army, you will pay money for other army, as we saw now when some countries refused to enjoy the sanctions against Russian Federation and pay money for Russia to kill Ukrainian children, Ukrainian women. It's very important to understand that as well as it's impossible to realize how Europe and European Union can be without free nations of Western Balkans, including Kosovo. It's impossible to realize how Europe and European Union can be without such nations as Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. I think that this report has the excellent possibility to understand that now we are all in one boat, a boat of democracy. But this boat must be protected, and must be protected not only by economical methods, but as well by military methods. When somebody tries to discuss the future of military forces of European Union as the alternative to NATO, I think that it's the worst mistake. Without the United States, Great Britain, Canada, Japan, and other free world, it's impossible to protect democracy in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergei. Next in the debate, I call Madam Sensnaya Novakovic-Bursak. You have the floor, Sensnaya.
Dear President, dear colleagues, thank you for opportunity to address you, and I will be very, very brief. Firstly,
I would like to thank to Mr. Papandreou and everyone who strives to make the topic of Western Balkan countries' European perspective in the focus of attention, because it's clear to all of us how important it is, how for the region and for Europe as a whole. However, it's equally important that our citizens believe in that perspective and feel its importance as well, and it is rightly mentioned in the report that trust and the desire to EU accession is declining throughout the region, unfortunately. I think that it is more important to ask ourselves about the reasons for that situation and to try to find the correct answers on the internal European level than to look for the threats from the abroad and to trying to find enemies when they don't exist. On my opinion, one of the key reasons for the public mistrust is the double standards history and existence throughout the region, unfortunately. We cannot talk about the rule of law, especially international law, if you have one standard towards Serbia and another towards other countries, as we have now. It's really difficult, believe me, to believe in democracy, while at the same time, in my country, in Bosnia Herzegovina, lives a man, a resident of a foreign country, who pretending himself to be high representative, who without the necessary legitimacy or any legal basis, trying to pass laws or impose laws and regulate internal relations. Who can say for the Bosnia Herzegovina that is sovereign and democratic country, having in mind that fact? Currently, in Bosnia Herzegovina, we have a brutal attempt interfering the election process based on illegal act of Central Election Commission, an institution that is obliged to respect and implement election law, and unfortunately, some from the international community welcome it. And if we are talking about reconciliation, then all victims must be equally important and respected, because unfortunately, there were many of them on all sides. And for the end, if we really want Western Balkan countries within the EU, we need more unequivocal rule of law, real democracy, and fair approach to the past, to the present, and especially to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Snana. Now I call in the debate Madam Blerina Gilameti from Albania. You have the floor, Blerina.
Dear Chair, first let me congratulate Mr. Papandreou for the outstanding report. And I want to emphasize that it was the distant year 1990 when the EU launched for the first time the new approach for the Western Balkans. And that was that kind of decision that not only raised hope, but at the same time served as an important catalyst for our countries to work for their economic development, leaving behind the wounds of the war that have taken place in Balkans, and be oriented towards the strengthening the law and undertaking important reforms. It would be precisely this dream that would make the Western Balkans, and I want to emphasize here, the whole region, the 6 countries, rise above the difficulties and conflicts of the moment and be oriented towards building bridges of regional cooperation with the clear perspective that their destiny is in the European family and the sharing of the same value and the principles that EU represents. But even though 23 years have passed, the Western Balkans are still not integrated into the European Union. In the face of the optimism and the desire of our people to be part of the EU, politically, unfortunately, our countries have encountered skepticism that has brought inexplicable delays in the journey of our country in the integration process. The refugee crisis, Brexit, COVID-19, pandemic, and the recent aggression in Ukraine have highlighted the urgent need for the EU to first reform itself, to be more integrated among member states, and then to think about the management of EU enlargement and integration policies for the region. The lack of rewards for the progress risk, dampening public enthusiasm in our countries. More and more citizens, especially among young people, are pessimistic about the prospect of EU membership. European countries will not have to allow the European perspective of our countries to fade, especially in the context of where third parties are competing for influence, like Russia, China, and recently, like Iran attack in Albania. I want to emphasize here Iran attack in our East system. So everything fell down and will break down for many, many days. If EU does not pay attention to the region, Western Balkans risk turning into a space of geopolitical antagonism that could import instability into the European Union. It's time for Council of Europe to play a greater role, working together with EU. We have to stand together not just for the perspective of Western Balkans, for the democratic world. We have to stay together here because we belong to Europe. We share European value, and we have not to wait anymore to be part of our original family. Thank you.
Thank you, Blerina. And now our next speaker, to whom we are going to listen, Madam Elvira Kovac from Serbia. Elvira, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. For the last 2 decades, it has been reiterated for many times that the full EU membership for the Western Balkans is a geostrategic investment in a stable, strong, and united Europe. However, at this point, we have to admit that the EU enlargement policy towards the Western Balkans is at a standstill. Very modest progress has been made in the field of European integration in the region, and in recent years, the EU has failed to achieve significant and long-awaited breakthrough. It goes without any saying that candidate countries, including Serbia, are diligently doing their homework on harmonizing with acquis and institution building, but even completing all these legal and administrative tasks without the EU clear and honest approach, it is impossible to know at what point of the future these countries are going to become members of the EU. Repeated statements by the EU officials that the region belongs to the EU have begun to feel worthless and stale. The EU has wasted valuable time and a great deal of trust in the Western Balkans over the last 2 decades. I remind that in Serbia, accession negotiations are ongoing since 2014. It is very difficult to maintain the enthusiasm of the citizens for so long. In the absence of a credible perspective, Euroscepticism, especially among the younger generation, is growing. Unfortunately, according to the latest public opinion polls, only 1/3 of Serbian citizens trust the EU future and want Serbia to become a member of the EU, while slightly more than a half, 51%, expressly oppose it. This is mainly because the EU itself cannot decide whether it wants to have Serbia among its members, namely the EU approach offers too little reward tied to too many conditions. I'm convinced that the way of how citizens consider the EU integration is based on stereotypes and prejudices and not on concrete, real information. Moreover, of course, there is no doubt that it takes time to change citizens' opinion. In addition, fears of a severe winter are growing, and all possible challenges are requiring urgent measures and bold decisions, especially when it comes to key existential issues such as energy stability, heating, and inflation. Therefore, the EU should cooperate even more closely with candidate countries in the key areas of security, energy, and infrastructure. Normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina is essential to the Western Balkans. Concrete steps must be taken towards the establishment of the Association of Serbs Majority Municipalities as a proof that agreements are respected, that both sides are ready to compromise through dialogue and hope that satisfying solutions could be reached for both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvira. Next, prochain orateur est Monsieur Thibault François de la France. Vous avez la parole, Thibault.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Rapporteur, I will do my introduction in English as it's the first time I'm addressing this assembly. So it's an honor for me to represent the Rassemblement National in this assembly. This is the first time in the very long history of my party, we just reached 50 years last week. The very locked French electoral system didn't allow my party to have a representation in this assembly, as we don't have any proportional election in France. With my colleagues, we are four. We will carry a different sound of voice in this assembly, which sometimes is very happy to make some lessons and to give some lessons to the whole world. We will represent in this assembly the 13.2 million people that voted for Mrs. Le Pen at the second round of the presidential election in France. Et maintenant, je vais m'exprimer en français, qui est ma langue maternelle. Au sujet de l'intégration des Balkans et de ce rapport qui plaide évidemment pour une intégration sans condition dans l'Union européenne, ce rapport ignore pourtant un pan très important, c'est celui des différences économiques qu'il existe entre l'Europe occidentale, si je puis me permettre, et les Balkans. Rappelons par exemple que les plans d'investissement de l'Union européenne ont dépassé plus de 30 milliards d'euros d'investissement, dont 9 milliards d'investissements directement liés aux aides de préadhésion. Alors quel objectif? L'objectif de l'Union européenne était de moderniser les transports, les énergies vertes, la protection de l'environnement et la gouvernance. Mais à quel prix? La France, mon pays, subit de plein fouet une crise économique, une crise énergétique et un chômage endémique de laquelle elle ne se remet pas. Notre autonomie énergétique est même menacée cet hiver. Nous ne sommes pas sûrs d'avoir suffisamment de ressources pour pouvoir chauffer tout notre pays. Et ici, vous venez parler d'intégration de nouveaux pays dans l'Union européenne. Je vais préciser mon propos sur les différences économiques qui sont, à mon sens, insoutenables entre ces pays. Pour rappel, le salaire minimum de l'Albanie est de 191 €. En Bosnie, c'est 204 €. En Serbie, 283. En Macédoine, 240 € par mois. Et mon pays, la France, c'est 1539 €, soit près de 6 fois plus. Comment pouvez-vous estimer qu'il est possible d'intégrer les pays des Balkans avec de telles différences économiques au sein de l'Union européenne? Ces différences sont évidemment insoutenables. Alors n'oubliez pas, si je puis me permettre, dans cette belle assemblée, que nous sommes d'abord l'assemblée, une assemblée du peuple. Et je vous rappelle qu'en 2017, mon grand pays, ainsi que les Pays-Bas, ont voté contre l'intégration de plusieurs pays et de nouveaux pays au sein de l'Union européenne. Alors, si vous êtes si sûr, si convaincu de votre projet d'élargissement, n'ayez pas peur des peuples. Proposez aux États membres un référendum sur le sujet, sur l'établissement, sur l'intégration de ces pays dans l'Union européenne, et je peux vous garantir une chose, c'est que le résultat de ce référendum sera bien différent de l'ensemble des discours que j'ai pu entendre autour de cette table et dans cette assemblée ce matin. Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous, Thibault. The last speaker in the debate will be Mr. Koloman Brenner from Hungary. Then I have to close the list. Koloman, you have the floor.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, zuerst möchte ich natürlich mein Anerkennen aussprechen für Herrn Rapporteur Papandreou und allen Mitwirkenden für diesen exzellenten Bericht. Lassen Sie mich beginnen aus der historischen Perspektive. Ich komme doch aus einem Land, Ungarn, wo wir jahrhundertelang engste Verbundenheit hatten mit den Balkanstaaten. Die Lehre der Geschichte ist, ohne die Balkanstaaten gibt es weder Frieden noch Stabilität in Europa. Noch dazu sind wir in Zeiten, wo seit der russischen Aggression gegen die Ukraine unsere globale Weltordnung neu adjustiert wird, eindeutig. Als junger Mensch durfte ich miterleben, wie 1989, 90 bei der politischen Wende eine große globale geopolitische Veränderung geschehen ist. Die ostmitteleuropäischen Staaten haben sich befreit aus der sowjetrussischen Besatzung und von den kommunistischen Einparteiensystemen. Wir müssen hier und heute eine eindeutige Zukunftsperspektive geben den Balkanstaaten. Das ist eine Auswahl von Werten und nicht von Rechnungen, Gasrechnungen, lieber Kollege. Werte der Europäischen Union und der Europäischen Gemeinschaft sind die Rechtsstaatlichkeit, Medienfreiheit und wirklich die Achtung von den nationalen Minderheiten. Glauben Sie mir, als Oppositionspolitiker, als konservativer Oppositionspolitiker aus Ungarn, ich weiß, wie wichtig all diese europäischen Grundwerte sind. Auf der anderen Seite, wenn ich schon die Rechte der nationalen Minderheiten angesprochen habe, dies ist auch ein Garant für die sichere Zukunft in Europa. Und wir sitzen ja hier im Europarat. Wir haben die Sprachencharta. Wir haben das Rahmenübereinkommen zum Schutz nationaler Minderheiten. Ich darf hier in dieser parlamentarischen Versammlung in meiner deutschen Muttersprache reden. Ich gehöre zur deutschen Minderheit in Ungarn. Auch in solchen Staaten wie zum Beispiel, wie erwähnt, Bosnien Herzegowina, haben wir ja die Zielsetzung, wohin es sich entwickeln sollte. Dass es natürlich eine schwierige Aufgabe ist für all die Länder, und das ist jetzt mein Aufruf an die Kolleginnen und Kollegen in den Balkanstaaten, all die Kriterien, Kopenhagener Kriterien damals genannt, beim Aufnahmeprozess von unseren Ländern zu erfüllen, das steht auf der anderen Seite der Medaille. Dankeschön für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Danke sehr, Koloman. As I said, I now have to interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been given the opportunity to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the texts are to be submitted in typescript electronically, if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. And now I call Mr. George Papandreou, rapporteur, to reply. George, you have 5 minutes.
Very much. First of all, let me thank all my colleagues for the warm support for this report and their comments. On the country-specific comments, the goal of this report is not to avoid the conflicts that we have in the region, but to see how the Council of Europe can be a major player towards the resolution of these. And the accession process and the reform process where the Council of Europe has a role can become a catalyst for solving these problems. Secondly, democracy, I believe, is linked to peace, and peace is linked to democracy. Democratic institutions, when functioning well, provide security, a sense of justice, fight inequalities, poverty, respect human and minority rights, guaranteeing social cohesion in these very diverse societies. And they solve problems, democracy solves problems through peaceful dialogue and not violence. And to my colleague who is opposed to the enlargement process to the Western Balkans, I can only say that raising the standards, Mr. Chairman and dear colleagues, raising the standards of the Western Balkans is in fact a way to have a more prosperous France also. Making sure that it is a democratic area is a guarantee for a democracy in Europe. But it is also, as many have said, a geopolitical question. And accession is possibly the only way to guarantee peace in the long term. And this, of course, as my colleague Dora Bakoyani from Greece, the EU must have the will to solve this. The Balkans have been messy, and it's convenient that they have been, it's been sort of somewhat convenient for leaders that it is forgotten. It was forgotten for many years. However, this has created frustration, youth migration, corruption, as many have said, allowing for the Balkans to become, again, a geopolitical playground. So we need to move forward with political will, and this is where the Council of Europe can play a very important role. Reforms, changes, social reform, the new methodology and enlargement procedures, put greater emphasis on the rule of law, fighting corruption, and not only market reform. So this is where I think the Council of Europe will be of great importance. But there are other areas where, in my discussions with the Commission and with other leaders in the European Union, there can be other areas where we can move forward in the accession process. We do not need to reach the final accession of these countries before we find areas of cooperation, and many were mentioned by colleagues, in the health sector, in the energy sector, in the, of course, defense and geopolitical foreign policy sector. These, of course, are many areas where we can work together. I also would agree with Titus his experience, but also experience that we have had in the Balkans, the regional cooperation. We need to put more emphasis in the agency, that we own this process ourselves. And when we work together, I have found we can find solutions. But this regional process can be crucial, and we have seen that there have been some positive developments which show that there can be a will to solve long-lasting problems as we had between Greece and North Macedonia, and not only. Finally, we do consume a lot of history, as my colleague Dora has said earlier, but it is European history, and we must honor it. I believe something that I think our first speaker, Mr. Howell, mentioned, we need to put emphasis as a Council of Europe in the democratic education. This also has been highlighted in the report of the high-level group for the 4th summit. One of the key elements is to bring democratic education into our systems, into our educational systems, but also informally for leadership, for the younger leadership, bringing them together so that they can meet each other. In the Balkans, because of the Cold War, we did not have the chance to really know each other. And still, there is much area for cooperation and learning from each other. Particularly in conflict areas, we should be able to teach these conflicts in a way which shows the future is to work together in a very diverse society, in a very diverse region, which is in fact the beauty of the region. It is in fact an important element, an advantage for the region which we need to invest in if we build a democratic and peaceful region. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, George, for preparing on behalf of the Political Affairs Committee this most important report, resolution, recommendation. Does Mr. Zalt-Nemeth, the chairperson of the committee, wish to speak? You have the floor, Zalt. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to welcome also our Kosovo colleague who was able first time to address the plenary of the Parliamentary Assembly. The Western Balkans is really a European region, becoming, like many times in the 20th century, more and more a playground of great power rivalry. Over the 19 years which passed since the Thessaloniki summit, the commitment to enlargement has been confirmed many times at the highest level. However, this length of time, these 19 years, have not disappeared without traces and consequences. The European vision is losing its shine, and the public enthusiasm is lowering, dear colleagues, not just in the Western Balkans, but also in the European Union capitals, in the form of the so-called enlargement fatigue. We have to react and act rapidly, and this is our common responsibility to keep alive the European perspective for the whole region, especially when we are in the midst of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And this war underlines the crucial risks stemming from the European Union neighborhood. The Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy discussed this item on 3 occasions since May and held several hearings with various guest speakers, including Commissioner Várhelyi and Mr. Lajčák, Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, and other Western Balkan issues. These meetings were complemented by an intense fact-finding visit by Mr. Papandreou, our rapporteur, to Brussels, where he had a chance to exchange face-to-face with key leaders from various EU institutions, including Commissioner, member of the European Parliament. The European Commissioner for Enlargement, Mr. Várhelyi, appreciated the very balanced drafting of the report in his video message this morning in our committee. So, dear colleagues, it is high time for enlargement, when we should take seriously the enlargement of not in the shadow of the Russian-Ukrainian war. While the topic is complex and multifaceted, I am very glad to note that the draft resolution and the draft recommendations were adopted unanimously in the committee last month. Thank you very much, our rapporteur, Mr. Papandreou, your work, and the Secretariat, obviously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zalt. Dear colleagues, the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution which you find in document 15609, to which no amendments have been tabled, and a draft recommendation to which one written amendment and one oral amendment has been tabled. We now first will proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15609, as no amendments have been presented. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. Can we close?
Yeah, because there is no code anymore.
I close the votes. May I ask the results to be displayed? The resolution is adopted. We will now consider the draft. We will now consider the draft recommendation. I understand that Mrs. Jonai would like to withdraw Amendment 1 in favor of an oral amendment agreed in the committee. Is that so, Mr. Gonyan? Do you want to withdraw your amendment, yes or no?
This amendment that we tabled,
No, sorry.
I have just only to explain a little bit, Honored President.
No, you have to say whether you withdraw it or not.
Actually, the rapporteur has proposed an oral amendment as a compromise, so withdraw our amendment and support the oral amendment.
Thank you very much. Sorry, but our rules are strict, Madam. So, yes, you withdraw it. Then we have heard that indeed an oral amendment from Mr. Papandreou has been proposed, and it reads as follows. In the draft recommendation, paragraph 3, delete the following words: bringing together 5 countries of the region as members and having developed strong cooperation with Kosovo. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy or reconciliation, and if there's no opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7.a. Is there any opposition, the amendment to be debated? I do not see. As that is not the case, I ask the rapporteur to support the oral amendment. You have the floor, George.
Yes, very simply, we felt that this would be a good compromise. It is quite in accordance with the statutes and the existing situation in the Council of Members of Council of Europe. And I think it is something which, as we try in this report, to bring as much unity in this room. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Does anybody wish to speak against the oral amendment? I don't see. The committee is obviously in favor. Zalt?
Unanimously is in favor.
Thank you so much. So now I shall put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The oral amendment is adopted. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 15609 as amended. I inform the colleagues that a 2/3 majority is required for this recommendation. The vote is open. The vote is closed. The results to be displayed, and the recommendation is adopted. Congratulations. I interrupt our meeting for a second so that we can welcome the President of the Republic of Ireland. So please stay on your seats.
Son Excellence, Monsieur Michael Higgins, Président de l'Irlande.
Dear colleagues, may I now welcome in our chamber His Excellency, the President of Ireland, Mr. Michael Higgins. Dear President, may I say, dear Gwit Achuchtaran Higgins, in your own beautiful language. We are extremely honored by you joining us today at a time when your country, Ireland, is successfully presiding over the Council of Europe's Committee of Ministers. I also welcome Minister Byrne. And also welcome Mrs. Higgins, be our guest. Mr. President, I already had the privilege to visit you recently, your country, and to be received at your place in the margins of the Conference of the Ministers of Justice. Being in Ireland made me really appreciate one of the priorities of the Irish presidency, which is called Fáilte, which is, again, in your beautiful language, which stands for fostering a Europe of welcome, inclusion, and diversity. Mr. President, today we are also saddened that your country is currently grieving, following to the tragic explosion in the village of Gisloch in County Donegal last Friday that killed 10 people. At this very moment, when your thoughts are at home with the families and loved ones of the victims, your presence amongst us is particularly appreciated. Let me therefore express through you a message of solidarity with the Irish people and our deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims on behalf of our Parliamentary Assembly. Mr. President, your presence here today is highly appreciated by us all and demonstrates the commitment of your country, one of the 10 founding members of our organization, to the Council's core values. This is especially significant today when European and global security and stability are undermined by the illegal, unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression by the Russian Federation against our member state, Ukraine. Russia's violation of international law and the atrocities committed by its military against Ukrainians are shocking and require a decisive response. This war has highlighted the crucial importance of the founding principle of the Council of Europe. The pursuit of peace can only be achieved through justice and international cooperation. Sustainable peace must be anchored to the fundamental values of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. It must be preserved through effective mechanisms of multilateral cooperation based on respect for these fundamental values. Dear Mr. President, throughout your life you have campaigned for human rights and for the promotion of peace and democracy in Ireland and many other parts of the world. If I may, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize and acknowledge your efforts, your work and your personal deep commitment towards these values. Your wise thoughts and your deep experience are therefore of great value for us. And therefore I invite you, Mr. President, to share your wisdom with us today. Once again, be welcome, and may I invite you and give you the floor. Thank you very much.
If I may, President, with your permission, just in my own language, say, Tigi gogina agme erinagus fwy atmosffer bronach, mar an tragod a horle duna na, artana will and jokte, and jokte Thomas Pringle, mar unedi dob, Gwylenshe Gomorra renegs gomu weakus gutenis gachtana arena kovro and len. Translating immediately, may I just say, President, I took the opportunity of saying in our own language, the Irish language, which is the language spoken in the area where the great tragedy has taken place and which is represented in Parliament, among others, by Thomas Pender. I deeply appreciate, as President of Ireland, all those expressions, including your own and those of the Assembly, which I will convey tomorrow to the different families as I meet them. Dear President Cox, I've said, I called it into your Parliament, the members of the Parliamentary Assembly. I'm very delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you. I want to express my appreciation for the opportunity during the Irish presidency of the Committee of Ministers to be able to speak to you. I very much was pleased to meet both the President and the Secretary-General recently in Dublin. I think that was on the occasion where, again, under the auspice of the Irish presidency, a very important seminar took place on very much dealing with the violence against women, which is a priority of the Irish presidency of the Council of Europe. And it ended with the Dublin Declaration, which was very important. Again, I think that under the presidency, there has been a very important seminar on the effectiveness of the Council of Europe at the Human Rights Centre of Galway University under the title Lighting the Shade, Effective Application of the European Convention on Human Rights in Areas of Conflict in Europe, and that was very valuable. It is just 7 years since I had the honour of addressing members of the Parliamentary Assembly before. That was a time of grave geopolitical fractures, but it was too, I have to say, a moment of the brightest hope. Agreements had been reached in New York and Paris that year on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and COP21 provided us with a model for the building of a sustainable future for humanity and for our planet. I address you today when we are challenged not to allow the shadows under which we are currently living to defeat what are and remain our best hopes, agreements which have an intergenerational support, particularly among young people. Those agreements are built on foundations that include the crucial importance of multilateralism, a multilateralism which is at the heart of the values on which all of our global institutions are based, including the Council of Europe and the United Nations. Multilateralism is today under extreme pressure. We might even say in crisis, with adherence to its values very fragile. Indeed, the killing of civilians, which you have mentioned, President, is an indication of that. In such moments, I believe that we must reflect on what multilateralism demands of us and what should inform it. Perhaps if we are to recover it, if we are to have genuine multilateralism, then we must be willing to have a fully participative discussion on the universality of human rights. And this is not assisted by any hubris. It requires dispelling the notion that human rights are a uniquely European invention. We must recognize that for many people throughout the world, their experience of European intervention in their lives has been far from positive, indeed involved the suppression of human rights. The sources of human rights are much more diverse than the valuable European rationalist sources might suggest. If we are to achieve an effective, universally supported system of multilateralism, we must recognize that there have been many different efforts a transcendence towards rights in human history, and many codifications of rights. I think, for instance, of the codes of Hammurabi in Mesopotamia in 1750 BC, codes which have served as a model for establishing justice in many cultures and have influenced laws established by Hebrew scribes, including those in the book of Exodus. That admonition having been acknowledged, we can be proud of what was achieved by enlightened minds in Europe. In this context, the Council of Europe's great achievements of the European Convention on Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Social Charter. And these are best seen as part of a much longer, deeper historical instinct across all human civilizations to establish and respect fundamental rights in a manner which might apply across our different cultures. This wider vision, one beyond any hubris, is important if we are to speak authentically to people across all parts of the world on what are the common values which we might share, to enable a wider vision of how our global future can be managed sustainably, and now urgently in response to climate change and its consequences. The Council of Europe, this distinguished institution to which we owe so much debt for its role in Europe's moral and cultural reconstruction after the devastation of World War II, has provided an essential legal framework for the building of peaceful societies, its highlighting of the fundamental principle of pluralist democracy, respect for human rights and the rule of law, as well as its setting of standards in human rights through the European Convention on Human Rights system in particular, have been key achievements confirming the common goal of a freer, more tolerant and just society in Europe. The objective of peace, I'm proud to say, was an Irish contribution to the Charter in 1949. Only yesterday did we mark the International Day against the death penalty, now 37 years since Protocol number 6 to the Convention, which abolished the death penalty in peacetime, entered into force. The Convention's framework, which we must consciously and proactively nurture as an indispensable component of the architecture of stability, peace, and trust built on this continent over the decades, is a legacy and a resource of profound ethical significance. One of the great benefits of the Council of Europe is its wider membership than that of the European Union. Europe is not best described as a bloc. The Council of Europe demonstrates the importance of reaching out to our shared responsibilities, to social, economic, and ecological rights that can offer cohesion, fulfillment, and sustainability. There are, however, may I suggest, some basic rights which have been neglected in the global and regional discourse. I may give the example of freedom from hunger. Surely the most important right which any of us must have is the right to be free from starvation, and undoubtedly the highest security threat facing us is hunger. Yet today we find ourselves once more in the position of another grave hunger crisis, one of cataclysmic proportions. We see horrific, preventable scenes of famine and severe malnutrition across the Horn of Africa, a region that has endured devastating hunger 3 times in 3 decades, and that is responsible for 0.024 of emissions, suffering the most and the least responsible. On the previous 2 occasions, the world said, when details of the famine were reported to the United Nations by Mary Robinson, that we must never happen again. For we as a global community have the capacity to anticipate and prevent regional and global famines, giving meaning to the phrase, never again. Yes, it is in relation to global hunger and the threat of famine, it is important that we reach all the humanitarian targets that are needed immediately, which we have agreed in order to tackle the shortages and save lives. This, however, is insufficient. We need to look at the structural factors contributing to food insecurity, and to do so from a rights-based perspective, dealing with issues such as debt. 29 of the countries on the edge of collapse into debt, 16% on servicing debt, and 6% perhaps on public health. We must address monopolistic control of production and distribution of staples and food. For food insecurity is contributing to and exacerbating conflict. It is a moral choice between tolerating monopolistic economics at international level and supporting the right to survive. Our moral, I suggest, must address issues of sufficiency in a different and sustainable way. In relation to what we have just heard this morning, over the weekend and for a while now, there must be no impunity in any circumstances for breaches of international and humanitarian law. Ours and the Council's purpose must be to achieve in our democracies conditions of peace. If we enter into and accept a time where it is impossible to talk of the aspiration to peace, then the Council of Europe, and indeed us all, will have failed. I do think multilateralism is the principle we rightly invoke as an alternative to unbridled multilateralism. But it is a principle which must be tested for institutional adequacy. The Council of Europe has achieved much in its history, but cannot afford to be complacent about the challenges that remain ahead. It is appropriate, I suggest, to ask if the architecture which is available in current diplomacy can deliver on the original aims of the Council of Europe, or indeed of the Charter of the United Nations. It is a painful reality that the architecture and institutions underpinning multilateralism have proved to be fragile, weak, and I have to say occasionally not fit for purpose. If we can identify shortcomings, should we not then press for reform? Just as, given its dysfunctional consequences, we cannot continue to have 5 permanent members with a veto on the United Nations Security Council, continue to prevent and obstruct the consensus of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The Council of Europe, too, must be willing to look at its architecture, the architecture necessary for it effectively tackling, such as how it communicates with the European street. In this context, I welcome the guidance which the very eminent members of the high-level reflection group chaired by my predecessor as President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, has suggested on the future of the Council. I strongly support its 30 recommendations across 5 themes. And so too is what is very valuable is the work of the Parliamentary Assembly's ad hoc committee chaired by Senator Fiona O'Loughlin on the proposals for a 4th summit and discussion on governance and the future of governance in the Council of Europe. I think the Council of Europe has played a critical role in the encouragement it has offered to us in Ireland and the hope it offered. Maura McEntee, one of our state's first female diplomats and the first woman to serve as permanent representative of Strasbourg, described the Council of Europe as a stage in international progress unimaginable before the last war. Again, Sean McBride, a person who identified strengths and weaknesses to the Council from the very beginning, said, "It is, in my view, one of the most important and constructive developments that have taken place in Europe. Unlike many other attempts at world organization, it relies rather on moral, ethical, social, and economic forces than upon military measures." Both McEntee and McBride recognized the importance of the European Convention on Human Rights and the crucial role which its Commission and Court would play in setting standards. Despite the moral authority of its legal institutions, we live in a world where the legitimacy of both the European Court of Human Rights and the Convention on Human Rights continues to be undermined. Let me take this occasion to state Ireland's view very clearly. The European Convention on Human Rights must remain the cornerstone of human rights protection across Europe. To those who suggest that there is some tension between the principles of parliamentary democracy and the international protection of human rights, I respond unequivocally that parliaments flourish in an environment where rights are vindicated, upheld and promoted, not where they are delayed, judged, or even rejected. The reality of human rights, of course, extends ever further, and it is within the realm of social and economic rights that we in recent times have witnessed grave threats to security by policies and decisions which were far removed from the values of the European Social Charter. That landmark document that affirms how human flourishing entails the effective enjoyment of social rights, as well as civil and political ones. There were times, and there will be again, when the Council of Europe is the institution that is called upon to fill a vacuum, make a response. The report of former Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Mr. Thorbjørn Jagland, the impact of the economic crisis and austerity measures on human rights in Europe was such a moment. His report is a damning indictment of austerity policies that were forced upon the citizenry of Europe without consideration as to human consequences in order to maintain an under-regulated European banking sector, an approach that had serious implications for human rights. His report concluded, people's rights are threatened by the impact of the economic crisis and growing inequalities. European societies have suffered the effects of the recent economic crisis, which has deeply affected social cohesion in many member states and which may eventually threaten both the rule of law and democracy. Any widening gap between principles of the Council of Europe and the European Union, its courts and its members' policy, must be seen for the threat that they are to the rules and effective vindication of human rights. This paradigm that was imposed that trumped human rights contradicted everything in the spirit of the Council of Europe, and particularly the values that were expressed in the European Social Charter. We must ask why the Charter was not invoked when social welfare was being cut and public services slashed across Europe in the name of austerity more than a decade ago. The crisis of legitimacy and competence on economic and fiscal matters, a crisis which has fueled the democratic crisis we continue to see unfolding not just in Europe but around the world, has precipitated the great loss of trust now manifesting itself. 7 years ago, I said as a parliamentarian, parliamentarians must recover their ground. Parliamentarians are accountable. Yet the OECD informs us from their research that only 40% of European citizens trust their national governments, and even a lower percentage reported among poorer and younger citizens. There can be little doubt that social media is a key driver of this declining trust with its capacity to spread misinformation. But I believe that this alarming trend, which points to an ongoing democratic crisis in Europe, has been fueled by the continuing failure to critically acknowledge the consequence of reliance on a narrow economic paradigm that has resisted regulation, facilitated monopolistic tendencies, and has widened inequality, that has advocated austerity policies that have proven to be ruinous to social cohesion, that has been facilitated by an institutional inertia, something that has inflamed citizen cynicism. Achieving a vibrant democracy requires that we engage citizens meaningfully, inclusively, comprehensively, in an understanding and commitment to human rights, a literacy of human rights. That is why I would like to see associations of the Council of Europe in every state, associations of supporting the United Nations, delivering the debate and the options and the discussion to the street. We need to anticipate challenges before they become crises, and indeed before they become disasters, and use all of the tools available, traditionally and currently to us. How remarkable it is that in recent times, we, given our European intellectual heritage, have enabled an eclectic philosophy to test our assumptions, and indeed anthropology, to inform us on diversity and difference. These disciplines have had the potential to offer us so much to our present difficulties and circumstances, in understanding and anticipating the crises of our contemporary times, including those sourced in ethnic, linguistic, or historical basis. I do put forward today the case for a return to the use of such tools as anthropology as a means of promoting a deeper understanding of diversity and cultural difference, and indeed anticipating, as I have said, potential conflicts. Concentration of corporate power, the growing realm of the unaccountable, and private isolation and alienation go together. We need to defend the public world, including the space of discourse and access, be able to speak and listen to each other in conditions of respect and discourse courtesy. As public sector broadcasting has increasingly disappeared or become unregulated, we have seen an erosion of public accountability in the media. Likewise, the failure to establish any effective form of regulation over misinformation and abuse on social media has created a further lack of accountability in public commentary. In tandem with these trends, we continue to see a further monopolization of media and social media companies. We see and are allowing an increasing concentration of ownership in key digital and media companies, and indeed in a similar way as to how we experienced the dangerous consequences of monopolization in the production and distribution of essentials such as grain and fertilizers. We now see it in the media. We need to seriously reflect, I suggest, on the consequences of unregulated control of the spaces for public comment by a very small number of owners who, by not accepting responsibility or regulation, are facilitating a culture of unaccountable comment far outside the normal boundaries or restraint of political and social commentary. What we're witnessing in Ukraine, following the illegal and immoral invasion by its powerful neighbor, is an imperialist action. It represents a failure on so many levels. It is fundamentally also the consequence of a failure of democracy. When Russia was admitted as a member of the Council of Europe in 1996, the path chosen was one of a journey to democracy. It is a path that is contradicted by all of the recent events with their awful human consequences, for which, as I have said, there must be no impunity. The response of the Council of Europe was understandable in excluding Russia as a member. However, that does not, nor should it mean a permanent exclusion from the Council of Europe, or of hope that the Russian population of 144 million people, along with all the other peoples, will not return again to enjoy the necessary protection of the European system of human rights protection. There must not be, I repeat, any impunity. In order to rebuild peace, the response of the Council must be, while reaffirming its founding principles, one that reinforces the strength and efficacy of the instruments available to it. The egregious breaches of the European Convention on Human Rights being witnessed at present, the significant political, financial, and practical challenges this situation has brought to the Council of Europe creates an opportunity to progress issues which may have been held in abeyance or stasis for some time, an opportunity, the Council of Europe, to assert a renewed commitments to its values. Yes, the first challenge we face as Assembly members are what you are so aware, I know, from my meetings with the Secretary General and President, is how to end the appalling return of our continent to war, of an arms race as the outcome, creating and deepening grave geopolitical fractures that carry disastrous human consequences. The challenge of upholding human rights and the rule of law, while upholding and promoting democracy, must always be a core raison d'etre of the Council. This requires that there must be, as I have said, no impunity for human rights violations. However, to do this effectively, we need to set out a longer-term vision of the Council's role in a post-conflict Europe and how that role might fit within the wider multilateral and institutional architecture. We should revert to the Council's fundamental strengths in rebuilding peace, notably the bedrock that is the European Convention on Human Rights. It must now be re-invoked, extended, bolstered, and reasserted and resourced, become part of the discourse of the European street. In doing this, I firmly believe that we must focus on the indivisibility of human rights on all their dimensions. We need to commit to what might be a wider definition of comprehensive security in Europe, and thus constitute a European step towards a universal human rights-based approach to security, a security that includes the rights to live free from food insecurity, and which includes all of the rights of participation. The universality of human rights is based on the recognition, after all, of the common humanity of all. This principle, our common humanity in all its dimensions, must be our bedrock. Any review of the Convention framework, I think, must incorporate additional basic human rights, such as the right to a clean environment, which is linked to the right to be free from hunger. It is a reality that both climate change and hunger are driving conflict. We have currently, I think, 64 conflicts on our planet, and will continue to drive future conflicts. Responding to climate change and its consequences has slipped down the rank of prioritized global policy issues over the course of the pandemic and the war, and it has done so at our peril. An under-recognized strength of the Council of Europe has been its emphasis on the role of culture in nurturing democracy. For us Irish, a nation attached to the preservation of an ancient Gaelic language once proscribed, the adoption of the Convention for the Protection of National Minorities is just one example. It was an important step towards the recognition of cultural rights throughout Europe. And while I am proud to say that from the beginning Ireland was among the first to acknowledge the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, we must acknowledge that for us and all members, there is also the test of efficacy in delivering remedies and adequacy of response. As of January 2022, dear friends, 47% of the leading judgments handed down by the court over the past 10 years are still pending implementation. There are 1,300 leading judgments pending overall. This is addressed by the distinguished group that you will be discussing. For example, more needs to be done in my own country with regard to the protection of minority groups, in particular travellers. In its most recent assessment, 2021, the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, within the ambit of the Framework Convention on National Minorities, concluded there is still a substantial shortfall in the provision of accommodation for travellers. Many traveller sites are in an inadequate condition. Criminal justice legislation, housing, provides for inadequate safeguards for travellers threatened with eviction, and evictions are carried out in practice without the necessary safeguards. And this is not about governments only. This is about publics accepting rights and the rights of minorities. These findings indicate the distance that we in Ireland still have to travel on the issue of traveller equality and full participation in Irish society. What our publics require now is not just acceptance of recommendations of the Commission or decisions of the Court, but better effectiveness of resolution and remedy. The failure to remove the source of the original complaints is, after all, to undermine the legitimacy of the Council of Europe's architecture. The European Court of Human Rights, which I will visit later today, played a pivotal role in advancing LGBTI rights in my own country, Ireland. This is epitomised in the case Norris versus Ireland in 1988. David Norris is a friend of mine, in which Irish Senator David Norris successfully charged that Ireland's criminalisation of certain homosexual acts was in breach of Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. This case marked the turning point for LGBT rights in Ireland and would go on to lead to the introduction of same-sex marriage legislation in 2015. But it had to come to Europe, having been, in fact, unsuccessful in the domestic courts. While significant strides have been made in that important area of human rights in recent decades, they are not uniformly in place across our union. Neither is the provision and legal response to violence against women. I am pleased that both Ukraine and the United Kingdom recently became the 36th and 37th states, respectively, to ratify the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention, recognizing as it does violence against women as a fundamental violation of human rights. Turning nearer to home, the European Convention on Human Rights is essential to the effective functioning of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in Ireland, which has brought peace on our island. The unique circumstances of Northern Ireland and the fundamental purpose of the human rights provisions of that agreement require an approach that ensures the Convention continues to be fully implemented in Northern Ireland, regardless of Britain's exiting the Union. Progress on post-conflict legacies in Northern Ireland is crucial in order to meet the legitimate needs and expectations of victims and survivors, to uphold the rule of law, and to contribute to broader societal reconciliation as an integral part of the peace process. And victims from all sides are in agreement that granting impunity to those guilty of crimes is simply not acceptable. The proposed summit meeting of the Council, which I support, which I think the intellectual group suggested, can provide a unique opportunity for leaders to recommit to the Council's first principles and set a longer-term vision for the organisation. In doing so, all member states must reaffirm their commitment to the principles and values of Europe as enshrined in the statute and to the implementation of the rights and freedoms. I personally think that not only in Europe, but really a movement to try and establish, if you like, basic rights, basic rights and the basic essentials of life would be such an important new development. Universal basic rights. I think this requires the unconditional obligation of the contracting parties to the Convention to abide by the final judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. Speaking of the Court of Human Rights, may I take this opportunity to pay tribute for his work at the court of its outgoing president, Robert Spano, and to warmly wish every success, Gachragas Banacht, to its president-elect, Shifra O'Leary, the court's first Irish, first female president. The Council of Europe's system of human rights protection is explicitly linked to the maintenance and support of democracy. This key point is emphasized in the 2001 report of the Evaluation Group on the European Court of Human Rights, which states that democracy lies at the heart of guarantees protected by the Convention. It upholds pluralist democracy by securing core principles. It promotes the rule of law, which provides the essential framework for effective political democracy. And if Europe is to fulfill or recapture the vision of its founding fathers, then the Europe we build must be founded on respect for basic human rights, including economic and social rights, and respect for the rights of minorities, migrants, and refugees. If we allow these rights to be diluted by the rhetoric of prejudice and fear, we risk undermining the moral legitimacy of our various positions on the world stage. This in turn will weaken, and perhaps is already weakening, our influence and capacity to act in response to the very real threats to these values. So as to our future Council of Europe, A key task will be the optimal calibration, too, of the interwoven relationship between the trinity of council structures, that is to say, the Committee of Ministers, the Parliamentary Assembly, and the Secretary-General's Office, to ensure the effective delivery of human rights. This relationship was identified by Sean McBride in the earlier years of the Council as potentially problematic. It is not quite resolved in a satisfactory, agreed way yet. The Council's unique range of institutions, standards and tools must be better deployed to improve human rights, rule of law and democratic conditions in any affected region. For example, we must significantly enhance opportunities for civil society, human rights defenders, journalists, academia, and others to engage and cooperate directly, regularly, and meaningfully with the Council of Europe's statutory and non-statutory actors on issues relating to human rights protection in areas of conflict and contestation. It is important at a time of deep conflict which we're experiencing to refer, as I have said, to the value of culture and to recall what we share in it. There are deep historical and connections between us all. For example, even between the peoples of Russia and the peoples of Europe, ones that can serve as a basis for future contacts and dialogues with Russia in better times. We must remain open to such a cultural dialogue. This is a moment, I suggest, dear friends, for the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly members to engage with vigour in the public space on behalf of human rights literacy within their parliaments, between their parliaments and publics. It is not a moment for yielding in any sense to the intimidations of any new populisms or ancient hatreds based on fear. It is a time to make the case for solidarity, protection, and possibilities. Fedrukti. European citizens and those who have joined us, and those who are joining us, will join us, must share a belief in a moral Europe that confronts shared challenges together in an open, inclusive, equitable form of multilateral engagement. Such a Europe must be open to the full diversity of the planet we share, and its vulnerabilities and its differences in efforts at transcendence and achieving sustainability, and its responsibility to future generations for biodiversity. So let us work together to give effect to this aspiration with authenticity, become indeed the conscience of Europe that the Council's principles espouse, one with a moral weight born, yes, of often painful experience, but one too which can offer a beacon of hope for an emancipatory future, not only for all the citizens of Europe, but for our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Higgins, for what I would call your grand lecture on the Council of Europe and its place in the multilateral architecture that we all need so dire in these so difficult and challenging times. You have agreed, Mr. President, to answer some questions of our Assembly, and I would propose that we first take together the 5 questions on behalf of the political groups. And if we do not spend too much time, then we can add some other questions. But we first take 5 of the political groups, and then you respond, Mr. President, if you agree. The first question comes from Madam Marina Berlingueri from Italy on behalf of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Marina.
Grazie Presidente, Sua Eccellenza, signor Presidente Higgins. I tempi che stiamo vivendo ci hanno fatto capire che per contrastare l'obiettivo di imporre un assetto mondiale basato su rapporti di forza militari ed economici, noi dobbiamo favorire un'alleanza globale che definisca in modo più efficace nelle sedi multilaterali principi e soluzioni condivise. Le chiedo quindi, Presidente, quali sono le nuove azioni e le nuove strade che il Consiglio d'Europa può intraprendere per rinnovare e rafforzare il suo ruolo, ma più in generale anche il ruolo della dimensione multilaterale nel realizzare un'alleanza globale che sostenga diritti umani, pace e democrazia. Grazie.
Thank you, Marina. Next question comes from Marina Valentina Martinez Ferro from Spain, and she speaks on behalf of the EPP group. Marina.
Thank you and welcome to this Assembly of the Council of Europe, Mr. President Higgins. Le haré la pregunta en castellano porque sé que lo habla estupendamente, al igual que las otras dos lenguas oficiales de su país, el gaélico y el inglés, como nos ha mostrado hoy aquí, dando un excelente ejemplo de convivencia e inteligencia, algo propio de las sociedades plurilingües. Me encantaría saber cómo lo han conseguido este respeto en Irlanda, sobre todo a nivel educativo, porque podría ser muy útil para España. Pero hago la pregunta en nombre de mi grupo, así que me ceñiré a lo convenido. Ya que tienen el diálogo entre las autoridades irlandesas y británicas en marcha, ¿qué podría hacer el Consejo de Europa como ayuda adicional que contribuya a un acuerdo pronto y definitivo? Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Maria. The third question on behalf of the political groups comes from Mr. John Howell from the United Kingdom, and John speaks on behalf of the European Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. President, for attending the funeral of Queen Elizabeth. If you and I can reach agreement on the Northern Ireland Protocol, how inherently strong do you think the relationship between our two countries is, and what do you think that will mean for tackling the complacency that there is here within the Council of Europe, together?
Thank you, John. And the fourth question on behalf of the political groups comes from Madam Ingvild Weltrus Torsvik from Norway, on behalf of the group of the Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Ingvild, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Digital technologies play a central role in the functioning of our societies. They offer new opportunities for our democracies, but they also pose new risks to human rights. Under the current European Data Protection Framework, the Irish Data Protection Commission is tasked with ensuring that the biggest technology companies comply with European data protection rules, as these companies are headquartered in Ireland. However, the Irish Data Protection Commission has been publicly criticised for lax or insufficient enforcement against said companies. My question is what the Irish authorities are doing to ensure that Ireland has an independent and effective data protection regulation, and which mechanisms will be put in place to ensure proper functioning.
Thank you so much, Ingvild. And now the last question on behalf of the political groups comes from your compatriot, Mr. Thomas Pringle from Ireland, and he speaks on behalf of the Unified European Left. Thomas?
Council of Europe. I would like to take this opportunity, if I may, to thank you for your kind words in relation to the terrible tragedy in Creeslaw last Friday. It meant a lot to the people of Creeslaw and Donegal to know that people were standing with them at their time of need, so thank you for that. Ireland has suspended the operation of the Council of Europe agreement on the abolition of visa for refugees while we hold the presidency of the Council of Europe. Do you believe that that is an appropriate measure in response to the refugee crisis caused by the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Mr. President, we have communicated already the themes of these 5 questions, so they are quite different, but I'm quite sure that you will be able to give a comprehensive reaction to this. You have the floor.
In relation to the first question, in relation to the future of Europe, I have in the remarks I made stressed the importance of the street. I think parliamentarians are very important, and parliamentarians are sometimes are regarded as the first point of criticism. But I think there is a need for a transparency in policy making, a transparency in discussion and in discourse. And I think therefore we should really, in speaking about derechos humanos or human rights, whatever, that we should really be speaking about having, as I said, associations of the Council of Europe that are able to give details to schools of what discussions are going on about both your committees and your plenary sessions. The second question about it is compañera de España is in relation to my dear friend from Spain. I should say that first, if I'll allow the question on language, the issue in the Irish case, remember, is that our language having been proscribed, not allowed to be spoken for quite a while, it became a huge importance in relation to the establishment of our state. And our issue now is not the knowledge of the language, but is issue in getting people to use it. And this is expanding among the younger in particular. One time, I think it might have been, we were talking about compulsory Irish, people thought that it was a kind of an authoritarian conservative agenda. It doesn't carry that anymore. It's very cool to speak Irish now among young people, and you'll find it in clubs and cities and so forth. And that is important, but the important part about it as well is to have a commitment to it. Our European minister sets a great example to everybody in the use of Irish, but it's very important that at the levels of the public service, particularly at the senior levels, it be used as much as possible. To our friends in the United Kingdom, it says that it was an honour to attend the remembrance service in Belfast when I had the opportunity of exchanging words with King Charles III, whom I knew as Prince Charles and with whom I had many good conversations. I think really, as indeed I had with this Queen Elizabeth II, who in fact both their family have had a deep concern that the peace would sustain in Ireland, and had patience, and in events that we shared, in particular when I returned, the first Irish head of state to return the visit in 2014, replying in response to her visit in 2011, was enormously helpful. The atmosphere, I think, the truth of it is, there's the same amount of investment between the United Kingdom and Ireland and the United Kingdom. People, how many our people are regular in contact with each other. And I think the atmosphere at present is beginning to look more positive in relation, and I'm very pleased with that, as will everybody, both people who are workers and business people and whatever. And I'm quite hopeful. In relation to our friend from Norway, in relation to technology, when I was teaching sociology, I was speaking about, if you like, the social impact of technology. It was a very old topic when we were teaching. But you've asked me a very specific question, and I want to answer it very directly. And it is that I think the independent commissioner in relation to privacy in digital might have been slow in getting off, but I was so in the report from government. There's an increase in both staff and about 23 million in resources, and the result has been, in fact, that the total number of fines is about 650 million. There has been fines against Facebook, against Meta, and there's been another 60 different warnings sent out and so forth. So I think it has gathered force, and it will benefit from the new resources. The Makara, Thomas Pringle, Viahasaram, level pairs, it is very, I'm a former minister for the Gaeltacht with the responsibility for the Irish language and Gaeltachts, and I just think what is important about the tragedy and why I will be going there tomorrow is very, very much as a small community. So literally everybody who is lost and anybody who's injured will be known to everybody else. I think it is something we will move past, and I think that the Irish community all over the island are responding. I might say, in relation to the previous question I was asked, one of the warmest messages I received yesterday was messages from King Charles, who sent me a very long message about all this. And we are, as President of Ireland, may I acknowledge all of the people who have sent messages expressing their solidarity with the people of Donegal.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you allow me,
I did ask a question. I didn't answer Deputy Pringle's question, but you should say, I'll answer it very like this. We had a directive which has allowed us, we have 50,000 Ukrainians, it will shortly be 60,000 in many cases, and that is under the temporary directive. But I assure you, I am very well aware that we have to learn too from our experience in direct provision. And it is very important that we, in fact, treat all migrants. And I think in many ways why you can say that we have obligations that arise from proximity. but those obligations in relation, because it is the neighbours, shouldn't in any sense take from our international obligations into any refugee from any circumstance of conflict.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry for interrupting you, because you still had indeed to give this most important answer. We can take 3 more questions, because then we are running out of time. The first question will be from Fiona O'Loughlin, then from Lauren Nashka, and then from George Fox. Fiona O'Loughlin from Ireland.
Fáilte oath Arash Uachtarán, you're very welcome back to these hallowed halls where indeed you made your mark as a former member. Our sympathy and our solidarity go with you and through you to the people of Cresslog as you travel to sympathise with them. Thank you for your very insightful and inspirational words and for your reference to the high-level group report. We here in PACE absolutely believe that there is a political imperative for a reaffirmed, renewed, reinforced and strengthened Council of Europe, and that should be done through a 4th summit. We also believe that we need to look at a new generation of human rights. And can I ask you what themes you think that we should prioritise to make the Council of Europe more relevant and more responsive to those that we serve and, of course, the citizens that we represent, and to add to the beacon of hope that you mentioned. Gurv Mahagat.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Now I give the floor to Mr. Loring Naksa from Hungary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm right here behind you. Thank you for your speech. The cost of living crisis aggravated by the war in Ukraine and the energy sanctions hits hard also on our continent and economies and makes it inevitable for the European decision makers to revise plenty of our previous strategic decisions. In light of today's economic and political challenges, how do you assess the perspectives of green transition in Europe, with particular regard to the role of the non-renewable but still necessary fossil and nuclear energy production? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now the last question comes from George Fox from the United Kingdom. George, the floor is yours.
Can I, as a Scotsman, join in the warm welcome to you, President Higgins? This very afternoon in the House of Lords, we're debating the 2nd reading of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. It's going to be opposed by people on all sides because of the threat it poses for conflict between the European Union and the United Kingdom. What can you in Ireland do to try and make sure that this kind of conflict does not take place?
Thank you, George. Mr. President, again, 3 quite different questions, and I have to ask you to answer as short as possible, but the floor is yours.
All right. Well, may I just say first in response to Fiona's question, I think it's very important that that ad hoc committee came from the Assembly itself. The questions affecting the efficacy of the Council of Europe and the possibilities for the future of the Council of Europe are not technical. They are more than technical in a way. They are about how, as I have said, the triumvirate can in fact interact with each other. I do think that it would help enormously to make, for example, with the school system and the need in relation to communications. I think the idea of having advocacy groups explaining and relating to people of all ages is very, very important. The difficulty about it is that those of us who spend our lives, it's 53 years since I first stood for election, unsuccessfully, but those of us who believe in many cases must value parliaments, but parliaments are not simply, you don't prepare parliamentarians. Parliamentarians are hearing and listening and representing, and that's why your report it was so important. In relation to our dear friend from Hungary, I think that we must remember when Ireland joined the United Nations, one of the areas into which it distinguished itself was in work against non-proliferation. And I have to say, when I was an active parliamentarian myself, I opposed very much the extension of nuclear capacity anywhere. I think, as well as that, we cannot go on and replace our discussion with others with threats of militarism. There is a report in the European Union on the future of Europe. Well, the future of Europe is not simply to be a military site. I think that it's very, very important that however, we have to deal with immediate things now, and as I said, so do so without impunity. But we mustn't lose our perspective. I do think, too, in relation to the question of the future of Europe, this tension between the European Union and the Council of Europe must be ended. But what I have said in my speech, you can draw, it was very clear, the conclusion, is that when it comes to a clash between economics in the narrowest sense and human rights, economics trumps human rights. That's where we all have to speak out and to simply say, that's why I believe, if we could imagine in relation to dealing with these issues of famine and hunger, even issues in Europe in relation to poverty, if we had a floor of universal basic services, you could then speak about the extras after that. But this is, I very much share the view that the weapons expanding, particularly in the invocation of the possible use of nuclear weapons in response is a whole terrible new nadir to sink to. I think in relation to the legislation that is before the House of Commons and the Scots, I could tell you know I am a non-executive president, and I'm reminded occasionally by people about that, but I'm very careful about all of that. But I did say to you about it, it is, whether you are wherever you come from in the United Kingdom or wherever it is like that, you benefit from the European Convention on Human Rights. Anything that interferes with the European Convention on Rights damages not only us in Ireland, it damages people in the United Kingdom, it damages people in Europe. I do think it is incredibly important, that's why. And indeed, our friends in the United States and Canada, Australia and others are very, very well aware of the stress that we place on the Convention on Human Rights as part of the Good Friday Agreement. But equally, I do think it is, I'm just reporting what is on the ground, available to everyone. Anyone who has some relative who's been killed, murdered, anyone who has been injured, well, from whatever part of Northern Ireland, none of them want a blanket immunity given to those who are responsible. And I do think, we need to get to a better place. Half my family lives in England. I'm one of the admirers. I think that, for example, the British National Health Service was one of the great achievements of humanity. And we benefited from it, everybody benefited from it. And my hope is that we all get to a better place. I think it is possible. As a head of state, dealing with the head of state, I might say relationships are excellent in relation to understanding. And I pay tribute to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for the knowledge that she amassed, the care that she had, the gestures that she made, and indeed that King Charles III is making. I think this will all be very, very helpful and may it permeate through all the ranks of politics.
Mr. President, may I thank you for all the words of wisdom that you have shared with us and the answers that you have given to our questions. I think we appreciated it all very much. I wish you a good continuation of your visit, and once again, bring our condolences tomorrow to the families and the beloved ones of those who died in this catastrophe. But once again, thank you very much for your grand lecture. We will reread it and we will study it. Thank you very much.